Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 2 of What If a Veteran Beyonder Was Reborn into Harry Potter as Dudley Dursley. Let the tale begin. Chapter 26, Questioning. Upon hearing this, Dudley, who had been half lying on the sofa, felt his pupils constrict slightly. This Dumbledore was truly impressive. To have guessed some of the truth based on such few clues, from the moment these people entered the room, Dudley had been observing them. Among them, the one who caught his attention the most was this seemingly kind old man, the principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. From what he could see with his spiritual sense alone, the energy contained within Dumbledore's soul far exceeded that of the others, and Dudley could clearly sense a threat from him. This was a very powerful wizard. Moreover, judging by the behavior of the Minister of Magic, Fudge, he often sought Dumbledore's opinion either intentionally or unintentionally, which showed that his status in the wizarding world must be very high. A principal of a school of magic having such strength is truly astonishing, Dudley thought to himself. However, the deduction should end here. Even if Dumbledore were very knowledgeable about magic, he could not possibly imagine the existence of Beyonder abilities out of thin air and link all the clues to him. He called himself the Knight Emperor precisely to let these people investigate alone. That name, giving them a target, was better than them investigating aimlessly. Hearing what Dumbledore said, the expressions of many changed. "You mean?" John's gaze immediately swept across the three people present: Harry, Hagrid, and Dudley. These were the three people at the scene. There was no one else besides them. "Oh, John, what are you saying? Hagrid cannot perform magic at all, and Harry and that boy haven't even enrolled yet. How could they possibly perform such advanced magic?" Fudge looked at John with an expression as if he were looking at a fool. "Sorry, Minister." John smiled awkwardly. He also felt that his current conjecture was a bit ridiculous. The two of them haven't even had time to buy wands. Even if they were at the scene, they couldn't perform magic, Hagrid also said immediately. Everyone's gaze turned back to Dumbledore. "I didn't say it was the three of them. My meaning is that it's very likely there was a fourth person at the scene who found it inconvenient to appear directly, so he created that black phantom while hiding in the shadows to cast the spell," Dumbledore said. However, as he spoke, his gaze swept over Dudley intentionally or unintentionally, as if he wanted to see Dudley's expression, but to his disappointment, Dudley didn't seem to have any special expression. He looked just like a frightened little child. "That is indeed possible." Fudge nodded immediately. Although Gringotts is extremely difficult to infiltrate, since one black-robed person had already appeared, it was not impossible for another to appear. "But we didn't find any clues at the scene," John said helplessly. It seemed now that Dumbledore's conjecture was the most reasonable, but they had no evidence. "Damn it, that black-robed person got away," Fudge said angrily. "The wizards at Gringotts failed to stop that black-robed person, and the Aurors who arrived later didn't find any more clues. This was the reason they were gathered here questioning Harry now, because besides the three of them, they had no other way to obtain more clues." Regarding that black-robed person, Dumbledore looked at Fudge. "We are not sure about his exact background, but some speculate he might be a Death Eater," Fudge said, frowning. "To avenge Lord Voldemort?" Dumbledore said softly. Hearing Dumbledore say Lord Voldemort's name directly, the others couldn't help but shiver. Actually, I have another conjecture. He might not have been here to kill me, or rather, his main goal was not to kill me," Harry said hesitantly. Everyone looked at Harry. "We had just arrived at the entrance to Vault 713 at the time. That black-robed person might have just been after the thing inside the vault." After Harry finished speaking, he glanced at Dudley. This was the conjecture Dudley had told him while they were coming up. "Vault 713? Fudge looked at Dumbledore in confusion. "An item kept by an old friend of mine. I had originally asked Hagrid to retrieve it today and bring it back to Hogwarts. I didn't expect such a thing to happen," Dumbledore said simply. "I see." Fudge seemed to understand something and asked no more. "I'm sorry, Professor Dumbledore, I overslept this morning. I was supposed to bring Harry to Diagon Alley in the morning. If I hadn't overslept, we wouldn't have encountered such a thing," Hagrid said, very annoyed. According to the original plan, they should have emptied Vault 713 in the morning, and even if that black-robed person wanted to steal, he would only have found an empty vault, but oversleeping caused their plan to go awry. "Hagrid, this is not your fault," No one knew when that black-robed person would come, Dumbledore said in a calm tone. These things are unpredictable, and saying this now really has no meaning. Dudley watched quietly, not saying a word throughout the whole process. A child born to a Muggle family, who hadn't even come into contact with magic, was indeed not taken seriously by anyone, and no one was willing to listen to what he had to say, and this was exactly what Dudley wanted to see. Being a background character was the best. One last question, Harry, do you remember those syllables the Night Emperor uttered? Dumbledore asked. This was the last clue. As long as they knew the specific syllables, it might be possible to know the language the Night Emperor used, thereby finding his tracks. Although this person appeared to have protected Harry, the appearance of this mysterious and powerful wizard was a major event for the entire wizarding world. This was because when that sense of majesty appeared, it wasn't just felt underground. The entire Diagon Alley, and even the outside world of London, had felt his aura. That was a sense of majesty that stood above all living beings. This was the reason they were pursuing the origin of the Night Emperor. This person was perhaps even more terrifying than the black-robed person who had escaped. I really didn't remember them. After thinking for a moment, Harry still shook his head. All right, then get some good rest. We won't disturb you anymore. Seeing this, Dumbledore did not continue to press. The others also knew that this questioning had likely come to an end. While exchanging opinions with each other, they began to walk towards the door. By the way, speaking of which, there is one more strange thing. Dudley discovered the black-robed person's tracks before he made his move. It was Dudley who reminded Griphook, and that was why Griphook went to check behind that stalactite, and then he was killed by that black-robed person. Hagrid suddenly said. Chapter 27, Harry's Cousin. Dudley, who is Dudley? Fudge looked around in confusion, while Dumbledore's gaze had already fallen upon Dudley. His blue eyes gazed through his half-moon spectacles at Dudley, as if trying to see right through him. Dudley, who was half lying on the sofa, almost rolled his eyes. Hagrid had to bring this up at this exact moment, not earlier, not later, which was maddening. Dudley, what did you discover? Dumbledore walked over slowly and stopped in front of Dudley to ask. Dudley Dursley, Harry's cousin, the son of the aunt Harry is staying with. Someone explained beside Fudge. Only then did everyone finally notice this little boy. He looked much sturdier than Harry, with blonde hair and a sharp-featured face, though his complexion was a bit pale at the moment. The two didn't share many similarities. If one didn't know they were cousins, it would be hard to connect them. I'm not sure either. After I entered the underground, I always felt like someone was watching us. However, that feeling wasn't strong before, until we were at Vault 713. I felt a strong sense of unease, so I told Griphook to check it. Who knew? Dudley's face was pale, and his voice trailed off at the end. Feeling like someone is watching? What kind of situation is that? Fudge frowned. Others looked at each other in dismay, not knowing how to explain this situation. They didn't doubt Dudley. After all, he was just an 11-year-old child who hadn't even been in contact with magic before. It wouldn't occur to anyone to suspect him, but the situation Dudley described was indeed baffling to many. I've heard that some people are born more sensitive and can discover dangers that others cannot. Could it be that this is such a situation? John hesitated before speaking up. It's possible. In the wizarding world, such situations have happened before. I remember reading in a book about a wizard who could foresee danger and dodge it accurately every time, someone said. Or perhaps his intuition is strong? For example, being able to unconsciously predict subsequent dangerous events, someone else added. Everyone was brainstorming, trying to explain the situation Dudley had encountered. Only Dumbledore kept his eyes fixed on Dudley without saying a word. Are you sure that, besides the feeling of being watched, you had no other feelings? After a long while, when everyone else had stopped guessing, Dumbledore asked again. I also felt a little bit of danger, I guess. I don't know why I had that feeling, Dudley said. See, I told you, some people are born with the ability to foresee danger, the wizard who had spoken earlier said again. It's fortunate that the child sensed the danger, otherwise the consequences would have been unpredictable, Fudge said with an ugly expression. this incident involved the death of a goblin, and although it caused a stir, at least the impact could be controlled. If Harry Potter had been killed here, the entire wizarding world would likely have been thrown into chaos, because that would mean that that person might have returned. Even if not, it would cast a huge shadow over everyone's hearts, reminding everyone of that very dark time, something no one wants to see again now. The group did not dwell on this issue, as there was indeed nothing to investigate. After asking a few more questions, Fudge left with the people from the Ministry of Magic. Once you have rested, go and buy your things. Diagon Alley should be at its safest right now, Dumbledore said to Harry and Dudley before leaving. Thank you, Professor Dumbledore, Dudley and Harry said in unison. 1 hour later, Dudley and Harry, having mostly recovered, met Vernon and Petunia in the Gringotts lobby. Both of their faces were somewhat pale. They had both felt that mysterious sense of majesty earlier, and being in the wizarding world surrounded by goblins everywhere had them on the verge of a breakdown, especially since Dudley had been gone for so long, which made them even more worried. However, later, many wizards suddenly entered the place. Someone had passed by them on the way, and they felt much better afterward. Otherwise, they probably would have screamed and fled. Oh, my little Dudley, why were you gone for so long? Mommy was worried to death. Petunia ran over as soon as she saw Dudley and pulled him into her arms. Mom, I'm fine. Dudley wanted to break free but failed in the end. Did something happen here? I feel. Vernon frowned as he looked at Hagrid, trying to ask. Nothing happened, just that there are a lot of people at Gringotts today, and we had to queue up to withdraw money, Harry said quickly. Is that so? Vernon frowned and didn't suspect anything further. When leaving Gringotts, Dudley could clearly feel that there were many more wizards here. Even in Diagon Alley outside, there were some powerful-looking wizards who appeared very vigilant. Are these the wizards from the Ministry of Magic? Official wizards, Dudley speculated in his heart. Petunia looked nervously at the strange-looking wizards around her, her expression becoming increasingly distressed. Why are there suddenly so many people? What on earth happened? Vernon also noticed something was wrong. There had been many wizards in Diagon Alley before, but certainly not like this. Everyone's expression seemed grim, many were hurrying along, and the previous ease and bustle were gone. Hagrid, is there a place to get a drink here? The kind that muggles can accept, Dudley asked, adding a requirement. After all, the previous leaky cauldron was really nothing to write home about. Oh, I know a dessert shop where you can have a drink, Hagrid said. Okay, take us there. Dudley was afraid that if he continued to take his parents around, they would collapse sooner or later. After finding the dessert shop, Dudley ordered some things. After settling his parents, he walked out with Harry. We need to go buy Hogwarts school uniforms next, Harry said after looking at the list. All right, I'll take you there. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions is where I bought my school uniform, Hagrid said, and then set off with the 2. Hogwarts school uniforms needed to be custom-made. Other than the tape measure that measured dimensions automatically, nothing felt novel to the two. So, what do you want to do next? Buy books first, or buy wands? After walking out of the robe shop, Hagrid asked. Harry and Dudley's eyes both lit up. Wands, the two said in unison. Chapter 28, The Wand. Without a doubt, wands were the most attractive thing, especially after having witnessed the powerful magic of that black-robed person earlier. They were even more eager to obtain a wand of their OWN.AS for Dudley. He was somewhat curious about how wands functioned. Judging by his current abilities, he could perform Beyonder abilities without using a wand, though it had to be a spiritual language, such as Hermes language. Perhaps, after obtaining a wand, he could use English to perform Beyonder abilities. In that way, the risk of exposing his identity would be much smaller. Having been baptized by that eerie world, Dudley was very cautious about many things. Even though, looking at the current situation, his abilities held a significant advantage when facing wizards, it was only an advantage if he were careless. In his current situation, it was very likely he could come to grief in a simple way. At the very least, that kind of spell that could directly kill a person looked very terrifying. When Dudley first faced it, he also felt a strong threat. Therefore, it appeared very important to hide himself as much as possible and not attract too much attention. However, Thinking of this, Dudley's gaze involuntarily fell upon the skinny boy beside him. He wanted to keep a low profile, but unfortunately, his cousin seemed a bit too famous. As time passes, everyone should gradually pay less attention to Harry, right? Dudley guessed in his heart. He really did not want to become the center of attention. Ha ha ha. As I expected, I knew you would choose wands. Hagrid let out a loud laugh and led the two little boys toward the wand shop. Ollivander's wand shop is a wand shop with a very long history. You will definitely be able to buy wands that suit you there, I guarantee it, Hagrid introduced as they walked. If there is anything you don't understand, you can feel free to ask me. Before, my attitude toward you was not good, I hope you don't mind. As they were walking, Hagrid suddenly said to Dudley, "Ah, it's okay, I don't mind." Dudley was thinking about something and almost didn't react when he suddenly heard Hagrid's apology. "All right, let's go." Hagrid was a bit awkward, and Dudley noticed that his face was a little red beneath his thick beard. Apparently, he was not good at apologizing. "Thank you for before," Harry also said to Dudley. He hadn't been able to say these words before, but now that he heard Hagrid speak first, Harry mustered up the courage. "Don't mention it, you are my cousin, after all." Dudley smiled, but he knew they were both referring to the incident underground. If he hadn't discovered the danger in advance, whether they could be alive right now would be a question. Moreover, in that situation, Dudley did not forget to pull Harry along when he dodged. No matter how you look at it, it was worth a thank you. As for Hagrid, it was also because of this incident that his impression of Dudley had changed a lot. The reason why his attitude toward Dudley was poor at the beginning was mainly because he had heard that Harry did not have a good life at Dudley's home. And that Dudley, this cousin, often bullied Harry, so he decided to vent his anger for Harry. It was just that after interacting with him later, he found that Dudley was actually not bad and not as evil as the rumors said. "All right, we have arrived." This was a very small, very dilapidated shop, and the gold-lettered sign on the door had already peeled off Ollivander, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. "This shop has been around for quite some time," Dudley said in surprise. 2,000 plus years was indeed quite impressive, at least in terms of making wands. This shop must have its unique qualities, otherwise it wouldn't have been able to stay open for so long. "Yes, many foreign wizards will specifically come to Ollivander's wand shop to purchase wands." After Hagrid finished speaking, he pushed open the shop door and walked in. Harry followed closely behind. Dudley walked at the very back, glancing at the various wands displayed in the shop window. Under spirit vision, he could clearly see that the cores of these wands had a special radiance. Spiritual materials, Dudley thought to himself. After walking into the wand shop, a tinkling sound came from inside, like the bell in a convenience store that alerts to customers entering. The shop was very small, and apart from a bench, there was nothing else. The most eye-catching thing in the entire shop was the thousands of long, narrow boxes stacked high, reaching all the way to the ceiling. Without a doubt, the things inside were wands. Swished on a ladder slid out from the back room. "Good afternoon," a soft voice came. "Hello," Harry, who was closest, immediately responded. This was an old man with a full head of silver hair. The color of his eyes was very light, looking like two shining moons in the dim shop. Dudley looked at this old man, but his attention was entirely on Harry, as if Hagrid and Dudley did not exist at all. "Oh, yes," the old man said. Yes, I knew I would see you soon, Harry Potter. You have finally come. Do you know? Your eyes are the same as your mother's. I still remember when she came to me to purchase a wand. It was just like it happened yesterday." Ollivander walked to Harry's front, and then, as if counting family treasures, recited the dimensions of Harry's mother's wand, as well as the materials used in its making. Then he talked about Harry's father. He seemed to be very knowledgeable about every wand that had been sold, and even when he noticed Hagrid, he mentioned in passing the one Hagrid had purchased. "It is a pity, when they expelled you, they must have snapped that wand, right?" Ollivander said with no small amount of regret. "Oh, yes," Hagrid said somewhat awkwardly. Dudley's gaze narrowed, and he glanced at the old, broken umbrella that Hagrid had placed in his pocket. He seemed to understand something. Ollivander's attention returned to Harry, and this time his gaze fell upon the scar on Harry's forehead. I am very sorry, this was done by a wand I sold, Ollivander said softly. That wand was very strong, but it fell into the hands of a bad person. If I had known earlier that this wand would do such a thing, I would have. Ollivander shook his head, and only then did he discover Dudley behind Hagrid. Oh, you are? Ollivander asked. Dudley, Harry's cousin, Dudley introduced simply. Oh, I remember, Lily's sister did not seem to be a wizard, and she came alone at that time. It seems you have awakened magical talent, that is truly wonderful, Ollivander said with some surprise. So now, let me see what kind of wands you need. You need to be clear on one point, it is the wand that chooses the wizard, not the wizard that chooses the wand. This is very important, Ollivander said earnestly. The younger one can go first. Ollivander took out a tape measure and began to measure Harry's body data. Chapter 29, Destiny. It was obvious that Ollivander was much more interested in Harry. Hagrid sat on a bench nearby, while Dudley stood to the side, watching with interest as Ollivander took Harry's measurements, just like before at Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. The silver tape measure Ollivander produced was automatically measuring Harry's physical data, from the length of Harry's dominant arm to his height, and it even measured the distance between Harry's nostrils. What is the use of this data? Dudley grumbled inwardly. Once a wand is chosen, a wizard generally won't change it unless it is damaged beyond use. It's not like buying clothes, where you can buy new ones once you've grown taller. Therefore, Dudley was very curious about how these measurements could possibly help in choosing a wand. However, Dudley didn't ask, he just interpreted it as part of the ritual of buying a wand. Mr. Ollivander, what are wand cores generally made of? Dudley asked the question he cared about. He had already used his spirit vision to look at them. All the wand cores were spiritual materials, but he couldn't tell exactly what they were. Oh, wands are all made using powerful magic materials, and every single Ollivander wand is unique. Here, I generally use unicorn hair, phoenix tail feathers, and dragon heartstrings as the cores for my wands. Believe me, child, it is the wand that chooses the wizard, not the wizard that chooses the wand. If you use a wand that isn't suited to you, you will never get good results. Do you understand? Ollivander explained patiently. It was clear that he was very knowledgeable about wands and was willing to explain their mysteries to those who didn't understand them. Oh, right, the measurements are complete. Ollivander put away the silver tape measure, thought for a moment, and then walked towards the back. Let me see, Mr. Harry Potter, what kind of wand would suit you? This one seems good. Ollivander pulled one from the mini wand boxes, opened it, took out a wand, and handed it to Harry. Made with a dragon heartstring, 9 inches long, quite flexible, give it a try. Harry took the wand, not knowing what to do for a moment. Give it a wave, child, Ollivander reminded him. Oh! Harry hurriedly gave it a wave. Oh, no, 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 not this one, this isn't the right one. Before Harry could even react, Ollivander snatched the wand away and quickly brought out another one for Harry to try. I didn't expect Harry to be such a picky young man, haha, Ollivander is going to have his hands full now. Hagrid laughed as he saw this scene. You don't know, the pickier the customer, the more excited Ollivander gets. Dudley nodded. At this moment, Ollivander's face was flushed, and he seemed much more energetic than before. I wonder what kind of wand I'll end up buying later. I'm actually quite looking forward to it, Dudley thought to himself. After trying several wands, Ollivander suddenly seemed to remember something and pulled a wand from a dusty corner. His expression looked much more serious. The excitement from before was gone. How could I have forgotten this wand? It seems this is all the arrangement of fate. Ollivander murmured to himself. His voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet shop, it was exceptionally clear, and all three of them heard it. Come on, try this wand. Holly, phoenix feather, 11 inches long, and quite flexible. When Harry gripped the wand, he felt a warmth at his fingertips, and a red light appeared like fireworks, illuminating the entire room. Excellent, it is this wand, how marvelous. Is this destiny? Ollivander said. Remember what I said earlier? The scar on your forehead was caused by another one I sold, and the phoenix feather that one used came from the same phoenix as this one. They are like brothers, but... Ollivander stopped there and didn't continue. Hagrid frowned slightly, clearly knowing something. That Lord Voldemort seems to really have some kind of occult connection with Harry. Seeing this, Dudley pondered slightly in his heart. Before, he had only thought that Lord Voldemort was a heinous wizard, but now, after learning more, he discovered that Harry really seemed to have some kind of connection with the U-No-Who'd in that eerie world. There were also situations similar to this, generally referred to as an occult connection, which could not be explained by common sense. As for what was really going on with Harry, he couldn't judge yet. I must find an opportunity to investigate what is going on with that Lord Voldemort. Dudley kept this matter in mind. All right, Mr. Harry Potter, I believe you will surely accomplish great things in the future. Just like that man, what he did was terrible, but it could also be considered a great undertaking. Ollivander nodded at Harry, then immediately shifted his gaze to Dudley. Oh, Harry's cousin, it's your turn. Ollivander hadn't remembered Dudley's name for a moment. His attention had been entirely on Harry before. All right. Dudley didn't mind. He stood up and came before Ollivander to let him take his measurements. Soon, the measurements were complete, and Ollivander began to ponder a wand suitable for Dudley. Come, try this one, ebony, 10 inches long, rather stiff. Dudley took the wand that Ollivander handed over. In that instant, Dudley clearly felt the spiritual power within his body flowing towards the wand in his hand. Dudley frowned slightly. He felt that the wand in his hand seemed to be resisting him. Subconsciously, he directly utilized the majesty of the Arbiter, attempting to subdue the wand in his hand. Oh, no, not this one. Ollivander seemed to have sensed something and hurriedly snatched the wand from Dudley's hand. The corner of Dudley's mouth twitched slightly. He felt that he should have been able to subdue that wand, and from the contact just now, the wand didn't reject spiritual power. On the contrary, it even had a good amplifying effect. It concentrated the originally scattered spiritual power and then released it. From the contact just now, Dudley had already roughly understood the operating logic of the wand. For him, a wand was not a necessity. Having one could allow him to better unleash his abilities, but not having one wouldn't affect him either. But for wizards, they couldn't control their spiritual power very well, so they needed the help of a wand to unleash the power of their spells. From this point of view, experts among wizards should also possess the ability to cast magic without using a wand, but the magic cast shouldn't be very strong. Chapter 30, Dudley's Wand. To everyone's surprise, in the time that followed, Ollivander had Dudley try over a dozen wands, yet not a single one was suitable for him. Dudley wasn't sure how Ollivander determined whether a wand suited him, but as far as he was concerned, once these wands entered his hands, they all seemed to resist him somewhat, or rather, they were a little afraid of him, without exception. As long as Dudley unleashed his beyonder abilities, he could easily suppress them and make these wands serve him, but this didn't seem to be Ollivander's standard for selecting a wand. Whenever Dudley subdued the wand in his hand, Ollivander would promptly snatch it away, looking as if he were rescuing his own bullied child. Oh, I didn't expect this, another even pickier child. It's all right, I can always find a wand that suits you here. There must be one. Ollivander muttered to himself while scurrying around the shop. He managed to dig out wands from all sorts of nooks and crannies. Many of them looked like they had been stored there for centuries, but the vast majority of these wands never even reached Dudley's hands, as Ollivander dismissed them himself. You're even pickier than I am, Harry remarked, surprised. Indeed. Hagrid hadn't expected it to take this long. He checked his watch and stood up, saying, How about this, Harry, you stay here and keep your cousin company. I have some business to attend to. I'll be right back. After greeting Ollivander and Dudley, Hagrid left the room. Actually, if we can't find a suitable one, any random one will do, Dudley said helplessly. That he didn't have such high requirements for a wand. As long as it worked, that was fine. After all, his beyonder abilities could be unleashed without a wand. Dudley even felt that as long as he controlled his spirituality well, he could cast many spells without a wand on. Of course, he hadn't tried this yet and would only know after learning more spells. No, absolutely not. A wand must match its master. Ollivander immediately rejected Dudley's suggestion and continued searching the shop. Fine, Dudley shrugged and simply sat down next to Harry. I didn't expect you to be picky about toys, and now even about wands, Harry teased with a smile. What are you talking about? It's clearly the wands that are picky about me, damn it, Dudley said helplessly. Another half-hour passed, and Dudley felt like he was about to fall asleep. During this time, other wizards came to buy wands, but they were all sent away by Ollivander. He seemed to be fixated on Dudley today and looked determined not to give up until he found a suitable one for him. Could it be that there truly isn't a wand suitable for him? By this point, even Ollivander began to doubt himself. Their family's wand shop had been open for over 2,000 years, and this was the first time they couldn't find a single suitable wand for a customer. For Ollivander, this was undoubtedly a huge blow. Ah, right, there is one more, but that one. Ollivander suddenly remembered something, hurried to the back room, and dug out an ancient box. This is the only one left that might work, but... Ollivander hesitated, but finally walked out of the room with the box and came before Dudley. Try this wand, Ollivander said. Dudley took a look. It was a slender wand, and he couldn't tell what material it was made of. In any case, it looked quite different from the wands he had seen earlier. All right, Dudley didn't say much and took the wand Ollivander handed him. Huh. Dudley was surprised to find that this time, the wand did not show any signs of resisting him. On the contrary, he even felt a sense of jubilation. So it really is this wand. Seeing this scene, Ollivander frowned and said, Is there a problem? Dudley toyed with the wand in his hand, saying as if he couldn't put it down, this wand was different from the previous ones. It was much more compatible with his spirituality and didn't require Dudley to use his beyonder powers to suppress it at all. Actually, this wand was not made by our family, but was obtained by accident a long time ago. This wand is extremely difficult to master, and ordinary wizards simply cannot unleash its potential. You could say that in the hands of most wizards, its function is no different from a wooden stick. However, our family left behind an ancestral instruction to keep this wand until now, and I suppose it has finally found its master, Ollivander said with a complex expression. It's that magical? Dudley was a bit surprised. I hope you can use it well, Ollivander said. All right. How much? Dudley asked. Having finally found a suitable wand, Dudley breathed a sigh of relief. Harry's wand cost 7 galleons, so it should probably be about the same. No charge, it's free. That's what the family instructions said, Ollivander said. Besides, I'm not sure what the core material of this wand is. I can only tell that the exterior material is elder wood, 13 inches long, and it has good flexibility, Ollivander added. Oh? Dudley glanced at the wand in his hand. It seems this is my destiny. Also, if you encounter any problems while using this wand, you can come to me. Although it wasn't made by us Ollivanders, as long as it left our shop, I will take responsibility for it, Ollivander said seriously. Thank you, Dudley said sincerely. The man before him was indeed a respectable wand master. When leaving the Ollivander wand shop, Hagrid walked over from not far away, carrying an owl cage with a snowy owl inside. Harry, happy birthday. Hagrid handed the owl to Harry and said with a smile, after accompanying Harry and Dudley to Flourish and Blots to buy the books for first-year students, Hagrid left. Immediately after, Dudley found his parents and left Diagon Alley with them through the leaky cauldron. Oh, God, I've finally left that hellhole. Walking on the street outside, Vernon and Petunia felt like they were about to cry. The air filled with car exhaust smelled so sweet to them. On the way to find their car, Dudley suddenly stopped and looked at a restaurant not far away. Its sign was different from the others. It didn't use letters, but rather square characters that looked like complex patterns. It was a Chinese restaurant. Mom, let's eat in London today. How about Chinese food? Dudley said, walking straight towards the Chinese restaurant without giving his parents a chance to object. Emperor Roselle's diary uses this kind of script, doesn't it? Dudley looked at the sign and muttered to himself. Chapter 31 Emperor Roselle. Looking at these characters, Dudley recalled the first time he saw the diary of the famous Emperor Roselle in that eerie world. Shock, confusion, fear, disbelief. He remembered being completely stunned at that moment. Although he didn't recognize the characters in the diary, he knew very well that it was Chinese. the language of an ancient Eastern country on Earth, because when he went to eat at Chinese restaurants as a child, the characters he saw on the menu were just like this, but unfortunately, Dudley knew nothing about Chinese. He only knew it was Chinese but couldn't understand its meaning. This made Dudley very frustrated at the time. It was like having a huge secret place right in front of you, but being unable to decipher it. In such a situation, you might even feel it would be better not to know about it at all. The appearance of Emperor Rozelle's diary also made Dudley realize at that time that he wasn't the only transmigrator in that eerie world. There were others. In fact, that transmigrator had arrived hundreds of years before him and had almost reached the pinnacle of that world. He established the Intis Republic, amended the laws, drove the progress of the entire world's history, and became a prominent figure known throughout the northern and southern continents, and the outcome of Emperor Rozelle being assassinated and dying mysteriously was a subject of much debate. Dudley always felt that this person hadn't died. He might be lying dormant somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. Of course, this wasn't the most shocking thing for Dudley. What truly made Dudley feel incredulous was that after he joined an organization called the Tarot Club and attended their gatherings, he discovered that the deity worshipped by that organization, Mr. Fool, was actually reading Emperor Rozelle's diary with ease. He knew then that this matter wasn't simple. This fool was also a fucking transmigrator, and one thing was very clear: both Emperor Rozelle and the fool came from ancient China. This left Dudley speechless. Why couldn't there be a transmigrator from Britain or the United States who left behind such a diary? For someone who could reach the level of Emperor Rozelle, his insights into mysticism, sequence, and even his understanding of gods, even just a simple record in his diary, could be incredibly beneficial, especially with someone like Emperor Rozelle. He wrote his diary in Chinese, clearly not intending for others to read it. Therefore, what was recorded within was definitely the most secretive matters and knowledge of that world. Once readable, the benefits gained would be immense. This could be seen from that fool. Relying solely on a diary, he could make everyone believe he was truly a god. Only Dudley, through some details, had deduced his identity. However, Dudley didn't expose this. He suspected that the fool probably knew his identity as well. Between the two of them, there was a tacit understanding. Of course, Dudley being able to reach a high sequence in that world wasn't solely reliant on his own efforts. The fool had his own opportunities, and naturally, Dudley had his as well. Dudley. Petunia's worried voice came from the side. "Oh, what's wrong, Mom?" Dudley snapped out of his thoughts and said with a chuckle, "Are you under too much pressure, or are you afraid of going to that place? If you want to give up now, it's not too late." Petunia watched her son staring blankly at the menu for several minutes without any reaction, very worried about his state. "I'm fine, I was just thinking about some things from the past," Dudley said with a chuckle. "Is it because you remembered the first time I took you to eat Chinese food?" Uncle Vernon asked. "Yes, I still remember that you couldn't read the characters on the menu at all back then and made a fool of yourself," Dudley said with a smile, then handed the menu to Harry. "Harry, you order. Today is your birthday." "Sorry I didn't get you a birthday present. Let this meal be your birthday gift," Dudley said with a smile. "This." Harry took the menu with some surprise. Petunia and Vernon exchanged glances, their eyes showing some disbelief. "Dad, Mom, after going to Hogwarts, you won't be there to take care of us. After all, we are brothers. Taking care of each other is much better than looking at each other with disdain. In case I get bullied, I have Harry to help me, right?" Dudley said with a chuckle. "That's right, that's how it should be. At least you can look out for each other." Petunia nodded and didn't say anything more. Vernon was also convinced by Dudley. They ate the meal slowly. It was Harry's first time eating such delicious food, while Dudley tasted a long-lost flavor in these Chinese dishes. Sure enough, the food in the Intis Republic was somewhat influenced by Chinese cuisine. It's all a familiar taste, especially this tomato scrambled eggs. I actually miss those restaurants in Trier. After dinner, Vernon drove, and the family returned to number 4, Privet Drive. Perhaps I can learn Chinese, or even some other commonly used languages. Dudley had this idea, although he would likely never return to that place. Not knowing Chinese meant he couldn't decipher Emperor Rozelle's diary and could only watch the fool act all high and mighty, which was quite annoying and sooner said than done. There was still a month before Hogwarts started. With his current learning ability, he should be able to simply master this language, even if it was known as the Devil's language and was one of the hardest languages in the world to learn. I'll sign up for a class tomorrow. Dudley made his decision. That night, Dudley began to look through the books he had purchased in Diagon Alley in his bedroom. Among these books were those related to spells and others related to history of magic, which were very helpful for him to understand the entire wizarding world. Time always passed quickly while reading. Dudley didn't even realize the passage of time. When he finally lifted his head from the pile of books, he could already see the bright morning light behind the curtains. Magic spells are truly amazing. Dudley couldn't help but take out his wand and wave it gently. Wingardium Leviosa. With the slight flick of Dudley's wand, spiritual power flowed into it. A piece of paper nearby floated up gently and flew higher and higher, following the command of the wand. Looking at it now, with my control over spiritual power, performing simple magic spells is almost effortless. I can even do it without a wand. Dudley set the wand aside, flicked his finger gently, and chanted in Hermes language, Wingardium Leviosa. The paper that had fallen rose again and hovered in midair. Pop! Suddenly, a faint sound came from Dudley's front door. Dudley's expression changed immediately. He felt that there was someone extra at the front door. Chapter 32, Bug. Who? Dudley was surprised. Someone who could appear at his doorstep silently could never be an ordinary person. Is it the ability to apparate? Dudley thought to himself. This was his home, and he knew it extremely well. As an arbiter, a place where he frequently operated would have a mystical sense, and he could detect any abnormality, especially when it involved magic. This was even more so. Ding-dong. The next moment, the doorbell rang. At least they're polite, so they shouldn't be an unwelcome guest. Dudley opened the door and stepped out. Harry downstairs had already gone to open the door. Professor Dumbledore, why are you here? Before Dudley could go downstairs, Harry's surprised voice came up. I've come to see you two young wizards. Professor Dumbledore's voice was still calm, carrying a comfortable aura. Dudley walked downstairs and met Professor Dumbledore, who was entering the room. Good morning, Professor Dumbledore. Dudley smiled slightly. Oh, Dudley, I haven't disturbed you, have I? Dumbledore said with a smile. To be honest, no. I stayed up all last night reading magic books and forgot to sleep. Dudley replied, believe me, diligent young wizards like you are rare at Hogwarts. The professors will certainly be very fond of students like you. Dumbledore joked, however, a reminder, sleeping is still very necessary. You're still growing, and you can read books during the day. All right. Dudley nodded with a smile. Vernon and Petunia came downstairs after hearing the voices, and they were startled when they saw Dumbledore, especially Petunia, whose face was somewhat unnatural. I apologize for disturbing you so early, but there are some things I believe I should discuss with these two young wizards in person. You wouldn't mind, would you? Professor Dumbledore said. Oh, by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I am the principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Albus Dumbledore. Mom and Dad, we'll talk with Professor Dumbledore for a bit. You don't need to worry. Dudley said. All right, then you two talk. Vernon frowned but didn't say much. Petunia looked like she wanted to say something but ultimately turned and left. It's incredible that they didn't yell at me. Dumbledore said, glancing at Dudley. Perhaps they changed their view of wizards after discovering their son is a wizard. Dudley shrugged. Indeed. Professor Dumbledore said, sitting on the sofa, I'm sorry about yesterday. Dumbledore said bluntly, I sent Hagrid to Vault 713 to retrieve something, but I didn't consider the danger of the situation and got you two involved. That was my negligence. Dudley shook his head and said, you don't need to apologize, this was something no one could have foreseen. One could only say that this matter was such a coincidence. If they had gone earlier or later, they wouldn't have met, but they just happened to be in the vault at the same time, and one of them happened to be the famous Harry Potter. We later tracked that black-robed person, but we found no further clues. He still escaped. From the current information, we know very little about him and cannot determine his identity, so we can only defend passively. During this time, the Ministry of Magic will send some Aurors, who are essentially like the police in Muggle terms. They will protect your safety until you enter Hogwarts to study. Professor Dumbledore said. Dudley frowned. Wouldn't this be equivalent to monitoring them? Although he knew it was for his own good, he didn't like this feeling. Moreover, it would force him to be extra careful during this period to prevent his secret from being discovered. All right, that's all I have to say. These are your 2 tickets. Remember to go to King's Cross Station on time on September 1st. Dumbledore didn't stay long. He was clearly very busy and prepared to leave after leaving 2 tickets. Oh, by the way, a reminder for you too. Once you enter Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry to study magic, a trace will be left on you. The Ministry of Magic will use the trace to determine whether you have used magic outside of school. You know, this is not allowed by law. Except at Hogwarts, underage wizards are not allowed to cast magic elsewhere, especially in front of muggles. Dumbledore finished with a smile, waved to Harry and Dudley, and left. With a similar soft pop, Dudley could no longer sense Dumbledore outside the house. It really is apparition magic. I wonder how high-level this magic is and if apparition has distance limitations. Dudley thought to himself, in that strange world, low-sequence extraordinary beings rarely achieve this kind of apparition ability. Only extraordinary beings on the apprentice pathway could truly come and go freely, but in the wizarding world, this ability didn't seem uncommon. What a pity. I was thinking of trying to self-study magic at home, but it seems that won't work now. Harry said, somewhat helplessly, that he actually lacked a bit of confidence in magic, as he hadn't been exposed to it since childhood, whereas children from wizarding families could naturally access magic and had many opportunities to learn. He originally wanted to self-study to see if he could close the gap between them, but Dumbledore's words directly blocked that path. No, we can self-study. Dudley said calmly. What? Didn't Professor Dumbledore say that trace thing would detect us using magic? That's forbidden by the Ministry of Magic. Harry immediately said, thinking Dudley was going to ignore Dumbledore's warning and forcibly cast magic. He said that once we enter Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry to study magic, a trace will be left on us. And that means, before we enter Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry to study magic, we won't have a trace on us, understand? Dudley said. Harry carefully recalled Dumbledore's words and realized it was indeed the case. So, that means we can try to self-study magic now? Harry said excitedly. Yes, you can, just don't blow up our house. Dudley reminded him, in reality, they were exploiting a loophole. Yay! Harry was overjoyed and jumped up directly. Dudley shook his head and glanced in the direction Dumbledore had left. Was he specifically here to remind me and Harry? Or was it? Chapter 33 Book of Admission. After Professor Dumbledore left the Dursleys' house, he disappeared directly from the doorway, but he didn't return directly to Hogwarts. Instead, he appeared on a secluded alley on Privet Drive. Snap! Professor Dumbledore suddenly appeared, his gaze falling on a tabby cat not far away. Professor McGonagall, I knew you would come. Professor Dumbledore looked at the tabby cat and said with a smile. The tabby cat glanced at Professor Dumbledore, and then its body quickly grew, soon transforming into a middle-aged woman dressed in a dark green cloak. Oh, Professor Dumbledore, I didn't expect you to be here either. Professor McGonagall said. I need to explain to them what happened earlier, and also give them the ticket Hagrid forgot, Professor Dumbledore said. Actually, you don't need to worry about Harry's safety. The Ministry of Magic has already sent Aurors to the vicinity. He won't be in any danger. Professor McGonagall's expression was serious, and she didn't relax much because of Professor Dumbledore's assurance. She said, Gringotts' defenses are also very good, but such a terrible thing still happened. At a time like this, we absolutely cannot let our guard down. Seeing this, Professor Dumbledore smiled and said, if Harry knew he had a professor like you silently caring for him, he would be very happy. I only have time these few days to come and check on the situation. Professor McGonagall said as she walked out with Professor Dumbledore. I've been observing them since they returned home yesterday, and I feel that the Dursley family seems to be different from 10 years ago. Their attitude towards magic and towards Harry seems to have improved a lot, Professor McGonagall said with a frown. Perhaps it's because their son, Dudley, has also become a wizard, Professor Dumbledore said. Oh, speaking of that, Dudley Dursley's name suddenly appearing in Hogwarts' Book of Admittance, isn't that a bit too peculiar? I mean, awakening magic talent at this age is truly rare, Professor McGonagall said, generally speaking, wizards awaken their magic talent very early. Many children from wizard families even appear in Hogwarts' Book of Admittance right after birth. For someone like Dudley to awaken his magic talent at 11, just a month before school starts, is quite an uncommon situation. It is indeed rare, but in Hogwarts history, he is not the only one. Professor Dumbledore said unhurriedly. However, there's nothing to worry about. Since Petunia's sister is a wizard, it's not impossible for her son to awaken magic talent and become a wizard. Furthermore, I've also had people contact Dudley and confirm that he has indeed awakened his magic talent, and no abnormal situations were found. Professor McGonagall stopped, looking at Professor Dumbledore with some surprise. You've already investigated? It seems I was overly concerned, Professor McGonagall said. Yes, as soon as I discovered Dudley Dursley's name in the Book of Admittance, I immediately found someone to approach him and perform the divination for him. Professor Dumbledore said. Upon hearing this, Professor McGonagall nodded slightly. Professor Dumbledore was indeed still very concerned about Harry. What was the result of the divination? Professor Dumbledore shook his head. It was just a simple tarot divination. He asked about the past, present, and future. The card representing the past was the Emperor card, and the card representing the future was Judgment. As for the card representing the present, unfortunately, due to Vernon's intrusion, the divination table was overturned, so no one knows what that card was. Professor McGonagall frowned. So, what does this mean? Emperor, Judgment. Professor McGonagall also understood some divination, but she was not familiar with tarot. Nothing can be seen. The direction of these two cards is a bit vague. The diviner tried to interpret them but found it impossible to do so. Those were her exact words. So, Professor Dumbledore spread his hands and did not continue. All right, in that case, let's wait until he enters school, Professor McGonagall said. On September 1st, I will go on the Hogwarts Express and enjoy the feeling of going to school when I was a child. Professor Dumbledore smiled slightly. He understood that Professor McGonagall was still a little worried and wanted to escort Harry on the train to Hogwarts. Once he reached the school, Harry would be much safer. Then I'll trouble Professor McGonagall, Professor Dumbledore said. Perhaps Harry will become a student of our Gryffindor. I'm escorting a child from my own house to school early, Professor McGonagall said with a smile. The Gringotts incident forced them to consider Harry's safety, especially during the period before Harry entered Hogwarts. The two of them hadn't walked far before they simultaneously disappeared from the street, as if they had never appeared at all. Time flew by. Most of August, Dudley spent reading magic books, and he had pretty much self-taught himself a lot of magic knowledge. With the blessing of Beyonder characteristic and an intelligence and insight far beyond his peers, Dudley learned incredibly fast, even though he had never been exposed to magic before. At least the first year spells posed no difficulty for him. Meow. A cat's meow came, and a small orange cat lightly jumped into Dudley's arms. After rubbing a few times, it found a comfortable position and lay down. Dudley casually petted the cat. This was a gift from his parents. The main reason was that Petunia and Vernon felt that since Harry had an owl as a pet, Dudley couldn't be without one, and after learning about wizard pets, they ruled out toads, snakes, and other strange pets. Finally choosing a cat, Dudley chose this cat himself at the pet store, for no other reason than it looked pleasing to his eye. Tomorrow I'm going to Hogwarts. I'm really looking forward to this world of magic more and more, Dudley said while petting the cat. But unfortunately, my Beyonder characteristic haven't been fully digested. It will probably take another 10 days to half a month. Without the support of the acting method, digestion is really slow. Dudley was a little helpless. The digestion speed of the lawyer and arbiter Beyonder characteristic was similar, and this was already the result of Dudley acting as much as possible. Otherwise, the digestion speed would have been at least half a year or more. At this current speed, Dudley could still accept it. I wonder if Hogwarts has positions like class monitor, prefect, or student union chairman. If so, I could use them to digest the later Beyonder characteristic like sheriff, Dudley thought to himself. After petting the cat for a while, Dudley began to pack his luggage. Tomorrow morning, his father would drive him and Harry to King's Cross Station in London, but the platform 9 3/4 on the ticket left Dudley somewhat puzzled. Chapter 34 Barbarian. At 10:30 a.m. on September 1st, Vernon's car pulled into the parking lot of King's Cross Station. As soon as the car came to a stop, Harry opened the door and jumped out impatiently. Dudley appeared much more composed, opening the door and stepping out unhurriedly. "There's still plenty of time, we'll make it," Petunia said. "We still need to find that platform 9 3/4. We must get there early," Harry said. "Professor Dumbledore left too hurriedly and forgot to tell us such an important thing." "It's fine. Although I haven't been to this platform, I can probably infer the situation with this kind of special platform," Dudley said. The two pushed their luggage and walked quickly toward the direction of the platform. Petunia and Vernon followed behind, but deliberately kept some distance. It was really because Harry's owl was too eye-catching to the people around, and plus, the owl kept screeching uneasily after seeing so many people, causing passers-by to cast suspicious glances. "We're here, it should be right ahead." Harry walked in front and quickly saw the two platforms marked 9 and 10. As they expected, there was no platform 9 3/4 on the ticket here. "What should we do? Should we ask the guard here?" Harry asked, a bit anxious. "No need," Dudley said calmly. His eyes blinked slightly, activating spirit vision. Not far away, on the pillar between platform 10 and platform 9, a bright light appeared, and traces of magic could be clearly seen. Dudley carefully identified it and discovered a portal that could be passed through hidden there. "Just walk right through it," Dudley said to Harry after closing his spirit vision. "Ah." Harry looked at the brick pillar and swallowed. "Won't we just crash into it?" "No, our tickets are magical. As long as you hold the ticket, you can pass through smoothly. After truly becoming a wizard, you won't even need a ticket to pass through this platform," Dudley guessed, based on what he saw. "Dad, Mom, do you want to come with us to take a look?" Dudley asked, looking back. "Okay." Petunia and Vernon exchanged nervous glances. They didn't actually want to interact with other wizards, but their son was leaving home for school, so they should at least see him to the station. "All right, hold my hand, and we'll go in together," Dudley said, pushing his luggage with one hand and holding Petunia's hand with the other. "Harry, you follow us." Dudley didn't say anything more and walked straight toward the pillar between 9 and 10. Whoosh! The next moment, the three of them disappeared right before Harry's eyes. So magical. Harry widened his eyes in shock. He had originally wanted to see how Dudley passed through, but he didn't expect the three of them to just disappear like that, and none of the pedestrians around noticed the situation here. "Hurry up, don't be late, it's certainly crowded with muggles here," a noisy voice came from behind. Harry looked back and saw a short, stout woman talking to four red-haired boys. It seems they are wizards too. Harry didn't think much more and pushed his luggage straight toward the pillar. The train whistle blew sharply. When Harry opened his eyes again, he had already arrived in front of a train emitting thick steam. Not far away, Dudley was looking in this direction. Seeing Harry finally arrive, he nodded. "Wizards actually have a train? Shouldn't they be riding magic carpets? Or flying broomsticks?" Vernon said, looking at the steam train in front of him. He had originally thought the ticket was just for Dudley and the others to enter the platform, and then something like a magic carpet would appear, but he didn't expect a train to actually be parked here. "Maybe the wizarding world is also keeping up with the times," Dudley said with a shrug. "Let's go put our luggage away first, and we'll come back to say goodbye to you in a moment." After saying this, Dudley pushed his luggage toward the train. Harry followed closely behind. "Oh, my son, he really looks like a man now." Petunia looked at Dudley's back, her eyes teary. Yes, it's just that he chose a magic school, otherwise, he should be studying at my alma mater now. Of course, he is still great now, he will definitely become an amazing wizard." Vernon's eyes also turned red. After getting on the train, Dudley and Harry walked along the corridor to the back, finally finding an empty compartment at the end of the carriage. Dudley nimbly placed his luggage on the rack above and then put Harry's up as well. "You're really strong now," Harry said with some envy as he watched Dudley easily lift the heavy luggage. "If you exercise your body more in the future, you can do it too," Dudley smiled. His physical fitness was not something an ordinary teenager could compare to. Beyond her abilities naturally increased physique, not to mention the enhancements to the body from the Justiciar pathway and the Black Emperor pathway. Sequence 8 of the Black Emperor pathway is called Barbarian. It significantly strengthens physical fitness and enhances combat ability. This corresponds to when a lawyer cannot persuade others with the law, they can adopt physical persuasion. Let's go down and say goodbye to them, Dudley said. Harry hesitated for a moment but still followed. After a simple farewell, Harry returned to the train first. Dudley was held in Petunia's arms, crying uncontrollably. Just before the train started, Dudley broke free from his mother's embrace and jumped onto the train that was already slowly moving. "Stop crying, Ginny, we'll send lots of owls to find you." "All right, we'll give you a Hogwarts toilet seat." "George!" "Just kidding, Mom." Next to Dudley, a pair of twin brothers were saying goodbye to their mother and sister, only the originally sad moment was completely broken by their mischievous behavior. Dudley couldn't help but smile, thinking these two brothers were really interesting. Dudley walked along the corridor toward the back of the train. When he reached the compartment, Dudley found that the compartment which originally only had Harry now had an extra red-haired boy. "Hello." Dudley took the initiative to greet him. "Oh, hello. My name is Ron Weasley." Ron introduced himself proactively. Dudley sat down next to Harry. "My name is Dudley Dursley. Harry Potter's cousin." Dudley smiled. Chapter 35, The Problematic Rat. Harry Potter, you mean, that Harry Potter?" Ron looked at Dudley in shock. "Error." Dudley looked at Harry, assuming Harry had already introduced him to Ron. "He just came in," Harry said helplessly. Dudley shrugged, casually picked up the cat sleeping nearby, placed it on his lap, and started petting it. The cat, startled awake, looked at Dudley with a bewildered expression, even questioning its own feline existence. You're Harry Potter?" Ron finally realized who the bespectacled boy sitting in front of him was. "Yes, I am Harry Potter," Harry nodded with a smile. "Then you really—" "I mean," Ron pointed to his own forehead. "Oh, yes." Harry generously lifted his hair, letting Ron see the lightning scar on his forehead. "You come from a wizard family, right?" "I saw your family when I entered the station earlier," Harry said. The Weasley family was too easy to recognize with their red hair. Harry had only glanced at them before and remembered it. "Yes, our family are all wizards. Our Weasley family can be considered an old wizard family. By the way, a distant cousin of my mother's seems to be an accountant, but we don't really keep in touch with him," Ron said. The friendship between boys often sparks from just a few words, creating a strong interest in each other. "Then you must know a lot of magic, right?" Harry asked, somewhat excitedly. "I heard you lived with muggles afterwards. What are they like?" Ron asked at the same time. Not bad." Harry glanced at Dudley beside him. If it were the Dudley from before, he would definitely have said it was terrible and even complained about it severely, but now, there was no need for that. "Oh, I forgot, he's your cousin." Ron looked at Dudley, feeling embarrassed. "Can you tell us about Hogwarts?" "We don't know much about the school yet," Dudley said with a smile. "No problem," Ron said immediately. "Hogwarts is the best magic school in the world, or at least that's what I think. The school is divided into 4 houses: Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, and Slytherin. Each house has its own criteria for selecting students, though I don't know exactly how they do it. My brother told me there seems to be a test, and it's said to be quite harmful to students," Ron explained. Hearing this, a look of worry appeared on Harry's face. What if the test was difficult and he couldn't pass? He hadn't been exposed to magic since he was a child, and he had only started reading books this past month. He hadn't even tried many spells. If no house wanted him, wouldn't that be too embarrassing? "Those 2 twins are your brothers, right?" Dudley suddenly asked. "Ah, yes. Have you met them?" Ron asked, surprised. "Yeah, I saw them joking around with your sister earlier." "I think you shouldn't believe everything they tell you," Dudley said. It was obvious that the twins liked pranks, and it was perfectly normal for them to fool their younger brother. "Fine, I don't believe what they say either," Ron nodded. Ron continued the previous topic, chatting about everything from the Hogwarts houses to Quidditch, the most popular sport in the wizarding world, and all sorts of strange and curious things in the wizarding world. These were things not found in books, all coming from Ron's own experiences. Dudley and Harry both listened with great interest. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and a round-faced boy walked in with tears in his eyes. "Sorry to bother you. Have you seen my toad?" the boy asked. "Haven't seen it," Ron shook his head. "Okay, thank you." The boy turned and left the compartment, closing the door behind him. Toads as pets haven't been popular for years. If I had a toad as a pet, I'd definitely wish for it to run away as soon as possible. After saying this, Ron pulled a sleeping rat from his pocket. "This is Scabbers, a pet rat my brother didn't want. Now it's mine." Ron's ears turned a little red. "It only knows how to eat and sleep all day. Sometimes I don't even know if it's dead or alive." Dudley glanced at the shedding rat, his brow furrowing slightly. He felt that there was something different about this rat. It seemed to have a faint, almost imperceptible aura of evil. "Can I take a look at your rat?" Dudley said. He wanted to observe the rat up close. If it could make him feel a trace of evil, it meant this rat might not be simple. Although it might just be his imagination, Dudley didn't want to let such a suspicion pass. "Oh, sure." Ron didn't think much of it and was about to hand Scabbers to Dudley. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Suddenly, the sleeping rat began to struggle violently, letting out frantic squeaks. "Scabbers, what are you doing?" Ron was startled and quickly tightened his grip on the rat. "It might be afraid of cats," Harry said. Dudley was petting his pet cat at that moment. It was likely that the rat had spotted the cat and started struggling violently. All right, I'm not going to feed you to the cat. Stop squeaking." Ron soothed Scabbers and put it back into his pocket. "Sorry," Ron said to Dudley. "It's fine, I forgot I had a cat here," Dudley said, but at the same time, his gaze turned to Ron's pocket. He always felt that this rat was somewhat unusual. Dudley blinked slightly, activating his spirit vision. A beyonder creature? Under Dudley's spirit vision, he saw a faint halo emanating from Ron's pocket, which meant that something with spirituality existed there. A magic species? Dudley guessed. He wasn't sure if such a pet had issues beyond the normal scope. After all, he didn't know much about the animals in the wizarding world yet. Perhaps this was just a rat with the bloodline of some magic species. The aura of evil didn't necessarily explain much. It could just be that it had come into contact with something else, or perhaps it possessed the bloodline of an evil magic species. All of this required Dudley to have a better understanding of the entire wizarding world before he could make a judgment. "I'll find a chance to take a closer look later," Dudley thought to himself, keeping this matter in mind. Meanwhile, in Ron's pocket, the rat Scabbers was trembling slightly. In its shiny black eyes, there was a trace of terror. Chapter 36, Mudblood. At noon, a kind woman knocked on the door of their compartment and asked if they wanted to buy anything to eat. Both Dudley and Harry were very interested in the food of the wizarding world, so they bought a whole pile of it. This was also the first time Harry had bought things to share with others, and the feeling was quite nice. During this time, Ron's twin brothers, Fred and George, came over to visit, and Ron enthusiastically introduced Harry and Dudley to them. The only pity was that he didn't remember Dudley's name, only remembering that he was Harry's cousin, which almost caused an awkward situation. Dudley didn't mind this. Once most people heard Harry Potter, they basically wouldn't pay attention to anything else he was saying, let alone remember his name. In the afternoon, the door of the compartment was knocked on again. This time, a young girl with bushy hair and big front teeth walked in. She had already changed into her Hogwarts school uniform. "Have you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville has lost his toad," the young girl asked. "No, he has already been here himself," Harry said. "Oh, okay." After saying that, the young girl prepared to leave, but at that moment, she noticed a scar on Harry's forehead. Because it was a bit hot, Harry had pushed back the stray hair on his forehead, which made the lightning-shaped scar look very obvious. "Are you Harry Potter?" the young girl said in surprise, sitting down directly opposite, next to Ron. Ron was startled. He frowned and shrank to the side. Yes, Harry nodded. Dudley was already used to this. He didn't even look up, reading a book while petting a cat, feeling as comfortable as could be. "My name is Hermione Granger." My goodness, I know everything about you. I bought some extra books. History of Magic, The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, and several others all mention your name and deeds, Hermione said excitedly. Harry was completely bewildered, not knowing what kind of expression to give, so he could only offer an awkward but polite smile. Hermione rattled on like a machine gun, talking about the history of magic, the history of Hogwarts, the differences between the various houses at Hogwarts, and finally concluded with which house she wanted to go to, which finally brought her monologue to a temporary halt. All right, I'll be going now. It's almost time. You'd better change into your school uniforms, Hermione said before standing up and reminding them as she left. Okay, Harry nodded. After the compartment door closed, Ron curled his lip. No matter which house I get sorted into, I don't want to be in the same one as her. It's just too terrifying. Harry didn't say anything, but he had to admit that Hermione's way of speaking made him feel a bit uncomfortable. Dudley glanced outside. The sky was gradually darkening. We should be arriving soon. Based on the distance, we are already in Scotland. Let's change clothes. The three of them didn't say anything more and stood up to change into their Hogwarts school uniforms. Just then, the compartment door was pushed open directly. A boy with a rather pale complexion walked in, followed by two big, sturdy-looking boys, one on the left and one on the right, like two bodyguards. The whole train has been talking about how the famous Harry Potter has come to Hogwarts. It seems it's really true. The pale-faced boy glanced at Harry, paying particular attention to the scar on Harry's forehead. Do you need something? Harry asked, frowning. These three people were really quite rude. Not only did they not knock when entering, but their tone was also very arrogant, especially the pale-faced boy, who drawled with a long, affected tone when speaking, acting pretentious. This is Crabbe, and this is Goyle, the pale-faced boy introduced to Harry. My name is Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. Harry frowned as he looked at the three boys in front of him, not saying anything. Dudley watched all of this with great interest. These three boys were clearly up to no good, and he wanted to see how his younger brother Harry would handle the current situation. Ron couldn't help but laugh out loud. Malfoy's drawling, pretentious tone was really unbearable. Do you find my name funny? Malfoy looked down at Ron condescendingly. I don't even need to ask to know who you are. Red hair, freckles, and old clothes, you must be from the Weasley family, who have so many children they can barely afford to feed them. Ron's expression turned ugly. Just as he was about to retort, Malfoy had already turned to look at Harry. You will soon find that some wizard families are much better than others. We are noble, pure, and incomparable to that trash. Potter, you wouldn't want to make friends with the wrong sort, would you? I can help you with that. Malfoy extended his hand. Dudley raised an eyebrow. Interesting. This scene is truly interesting. So Harry, what choice will he make? Dudley had seen similar scenes many times in that strange world. It was nothing more than interest. As Emperor Roselle said, the world bustles for profit, and the world rushes for profit. Malfoy was clearly a child from the upper class of the wizarding world. The resources he could access were inaccessible to others. If Harry chose him, he should be able to get quite a few benefits. Of course, Harry would also need to pay a price. His fame was a double-edged sword. If not used well, he would become a target for everyone. An average child might yield to authority in this situation, but it's hard to say about Harry. I think I can tell who the wrong sword is for myself. Thanks. Harry looked coldly at Malfoy's extended hand and said. A slight flush appeared on Draco Malfoy's pale face. If I were you, Potter, I would be very careful, especially careful, Malfoy said slowly. Otherwise, you might very well end up on the same path as your parents. They were just like you, equally ungrateful. Harry and Ron stood up with a sudden jerk. Seeing this, Dudley also stood up. What? Want to fight? Malfoy stepped back, positioning himself behind Crabbe and Goyle. 3 against 3, a fair duel. Oh no, there is also a mudblood here, he doesn't count as a person. Malfoy's indifferent gaze swept over Dudley, as if he didn't consider him a person at all. What are you saying? Ron's expression was terrible. Obviously, this was a highly insulting term. Even if Dudley and Harry didn't understand it, they could probably guess what it meant. Chapter 37, A Fierce Beating. Did I say anything wrong? A mudblood is just a mudblood. Malfoy continued arrogantly, Potter, if you hang around with these people, it won't be long before you become just as degenerate as them. Just like your parents. Malfoy's words completely enraged Harry. Ron was also burning with anger, and seeing Harry wanting to rush forward, he chose to help without hesitation. Whoosh, just at this moment, Dudley suddenly struck, grabbing Harry and Ron with one hand each. Dudley, he's insulting you, and it's really nasty. Ron tried to break free from Dudley, but found that Dudley's hand was like an iron clamp, holding him firmly, completely unable to break loose. Harry, on the other side, was also red in the face. Didn't Dudley always advocate violence? Why was he backing down now? Dudley didn't respond to Harry and Ron, but slightly tilted his head to glance at the end of the corridor. Under his spirit vision, there was a blurry figure there. Judging by the light radiating from it, the spiritual power was very strong. It should be a very powerful wizard. Immediately, Dudley's gaze looked at the compartment next door. That compartment had an out-of-use sign posted, and behind the door was a thick curtain, making it impossible to see the situation inside. But he could still see spiritual power emanating from it, which meant there was also a powerful wizard inside. From the moment he boarded the train, the situation Dudley observed clearly told him that on this seemingly simple train, many powerful wizards were hidden. He didn't know what these people were here for. Perhaps it was to protect their safety, or perhaps for other purposes, but regardless, in such a situation, one must be sufficiently cautious. This was the rule of survival Dudley had learned in that bizarre world. Do you think your bloodline is very noble? Dudley said, taking a step forward. His eyes, open with spirit vision, stared at Malfoy and his two lackeys behind him. Humph, much nobler than a mudblood like you. Malfoy said, frowning. For some reason, he felt a kind of indescribable pressure coming from Dudley. A person's status is never determined by bloodline. In my opinion, your so-called nobility is merely your own wishful thinking. Because apart from your bloodline, you are worthless. Take you, for example. The so-called noble and pure bloodline, on you, I only see noble and pure trash. No matter how noble the trash is, it's still trash. Dudley looked at Malfoy, speaking in a measured tone. Spiritual power continued to spread with Dudley's voice. His Beyonder ability had already been activated. As a sense of majesty was released from Dudley, the lawyer's powers of persuasion and eloquence were also taking effect. At the same time, Dudley was using the lawyer's Beyonder ability to guide and distort the thoughts and emotions of Malfoy, as well as Crabbe and Goyle. What did you say? Malfoy's face immediately twisted. Crabbe and Goyle also became incredibly angry at this moment. Their noble bloodline had been belittled to worthlessness by Dudley. More importantly, as these words fell into their ears, they actually felt that what Dudley said was quite right. This only made them angrier, an incomparable anger. Beat them to death for me. Malfoy clamored as he rushed forward, not forgetting to order Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy's angry fist went straight for the nearest person, Harry. Seeing this, Harry chose to fight back without hesitation, but he forgot he was still being held by Dudley, which caused him to lose control of his strength when attacking. This gave Malfoy an opportunity, and he punched Harry in the face. Ah! Harry let out an exclamation. It wasn't because he was hit by Malfoy's fist, but because he was dragged backward by Dudley's hand. However, Malfoy's fist was not without effect. It directly knocked Harry's glasses flying, and they cracked when they hit the ground. Malfoy, how dare you hit my brother? I will never let you off today. Dudley suddenly shouted, raised his hand, and punched Malfoy in the face, knocking him directly from the compartment into the corridor outside. And you too, bullying my brother, right? I'll beat you to death. Dudley shouted while striking out wildly. Screams and Dudley's shouts rose and fell. In just 2 or 3 seconds, Crabbe, Goyle, and Malfoy had all been pummeled by Dudley and landed screaming in the corridor outside. In the compartment, Harry and Ron stared at this scene, dumbfounded, as if they had been hit by a petrificus totalus. In that instant, they hadn't reacted at all. Dudley's strikes were too fast and too ruthless. Every punch landed solidly on the three of them. Even just watching, Ron felt the flesh on his own body ache. Pain, it was really too painful. After knocking the three out of the compartment, Dudley didn't chase after them. Instead, he backhanded and tore Harry's clothes, and smeared the blood on his hands, which he didn't know if it belonged to Crabbe or Malfoy, onto Harry's face. These actions were performed in one smooth motion. "What are you doing?" A middle-aged woman's voice came from the corridor outside. The compartment next door, which had an out-of-use sign, was also pulled open with a whoosh, and two middle-aged men wearing wizard robes walked out. "Oh, my God!" The middle-aged woman was none other than Professor McGonagall. She first saw Malfoy covered in blood, as well as Crabbe and Goyle rolling in pain. After walking up quickly, she saw Harry Potter, who was also covered in blood. "You, what are you doing?" Professor McGonagall looked at this scene in shock. "This Malfoy here brought 2 lackeys and ran into our compartment to hit my brother Harry Potter. Look, he even broke my brother's glasses and covered his face in blood," Dudley said loudly. By this time, the corridor outside was already crowded with students. When everyone heard Dudley's words, they basically ignored everything else, but they grasped the only key point: someone hit Harry Potter, and hit him until his face was covered in blood. "What? Harry Potter came to our school? Who hit Harry Potter? Who hit Harry Potter? Who is so bold?" The crowd was indignant. After all, Harry Potter was quite famous in the wizarding world, and many people regarded him as an idol. For such a little brother to be beaten on his first day on the way to Hogwarts, this was intolerable. Malfoy, lying on the ground, was so angry he almost fainted when he heard this. He tried to hum and mumble a defense, but as soon as he opened his mouth, it was full of bloody foam, and he couldn't speak clearly at all. "Professor, they went too far." As soon as they came up, they said Harry was as ungrateful as his parents, and even called Harry's cousin a mudblood, and punched Harry's glasses off. Ron came back to his senses at this moment and insisted on all of Malfoy's crimes. Chapter 38: Physical Persuasion. "Yes, Professor, they didn't just hit me, they also insulted my parents," Harry said, his eyes rimmed with red, his voice low. Dudley watched this scene, nodding with satisfaction inside. These 2 kids were actually quite quick on the uptake. "Harry, are you all right? Let me see your injuries," a middle-aged black man who walked out of the next compartment said, his face full of unbearable sympathy. I'm fine, just some minor injuries." Harry stepped back and said in a low voice he didn't dare let others check his injuries. Aside from his eye feeling a bit uncomfortable and red from Malfoy's punch, there wasn't a single injury anywhere else. When Dudley tore his clothes and smeared blood on his face, he had already reacted, and after the middle-aged woman and the 2 wizards from next door appeared, Harry couldn't help but marvel at Dudley's brilliance. If he had struck at Malfoy directly before, he wouldn't be able to explain himself now. Fortunately, Dudley prevented all of that from happening. "Professor, I can testify for them. I definitely heard Malfoy call Dudley a mudblood and insult Harry's parents. I originally wanted to come out to mediate, but as soon as I came out, I saw Malfoy swinging his fists to hit people. It was too terrifying." The one speaking was the curly-haired, buck-toothed little girl who had come to Harry's compartment before, Hermione Granger. She was clearly frightened. "I saw it too," the round-faced little boy who had lost his toad also said in a low voice. "How could they be like that? Hitting people as soon as they arrive." "Exactly. Everyone is a classmate. Using such nasty language and then resorting to violence, I wouldn't dare be in the same house as someone like that. It's too scary." "Professor McGonagall, can students like this really attend Hogwarts? Is this what they call a pureblood wizard? It's simply disgraceful." Everyone chimed in, looking down on Malfoy and the others on the ground. There didn't seem to be many people in this compartment who knew Malfoy, which meant that basically no one helped him when the crowd gathered. "Quiet. Everyone go back to your own compartments." Professor McGonagall took a deep breath and said loudly. Hearing this, although everyone was a bit reluctant, they obediently returned to their own compartments. "First, get them to their own compartment." McGonagall looked at the 3 people on the ground, her anger rising. "I'll do it." The middle-aged black wizard who spoke earlier drew his wand and cast a levitation charm on the three on the ground, making them float towards the end of the corridor. However, whether it was intentional or unintentional, during this process, either Crabbe's foot hit the door, or Malfoy's head accidentally hit the railing, or Goyle's spell went wrong and he fell from midair, crashing onto the ground. One could only hear the three, who were already moaning and groaning, continuing to let out screams on the way back. "Kingsley! Be careful!" Professor McGonagall couldn't help but remind him. "All right, Professor McGonagall, I'll try." Sounds came from the next corridor, but Malfoy's screams could still be heard from time to time. "You three, tell me clearly what exactly happened?" Professor McGonagall said sternly. She could already tell that although Harry's face was covered in blood, there were no serious injuries on him. Clearly, Harry hadn't come out on the losing end of this conflict. On the contrary, Malfoy and the other two looked and were actually much worse off than Harry. "Professor McGonagall, it was me who struck. If you want to blame someone, blame me," Dudley said proactively. McGonagall's gaze fell on Dudley. She had originally held quite a big prejudice against this Dursley child. After all, from her previous contact with the Dursleys, their attitude toward magic destined them to treat Harry poorly, and later events confirmed her view. But it had to be said that when the name Dudley Dursley appeared on the Hogwarts Book of Admissions, Professor McGonagall was still very surprised. For one, it was extremely rare for someone to awaken magical talent at this age, and for another, could a family like Dudley's really produce a wizard? She was skeptical about this and even suggested Dumbledore investigate Dudley thoroughly. Now it seemed that this little boy did indeed have some exceptional qualities, at least in terms of strength. "Professor McGonagall, don't blame Dudley. It was because I fought back," Harry said. "Oh, do you want to start sharing the blame now?" Professor McGonagall looked at the three deeply. None of the three spoke again. "Fine, I will tell Professor Dumbledore about this matter. I believe he will handle it fairly. However, punishment for you three is unavoidable. As for Malfoy and the other two, their punishment will only be more severe than yours. I will tell you about this after you complete the sorting ceremony. All right, now, clean up and prepare to get off the train and go to school," Professor McGonagall said angrily. "Wait, Professor McGonagall, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I didn't participate in this matter," Ron said with an innocent face. He had just been sitting quietly to the side, then inexplicably got dragged into this conflict, and didn't even have time to give Malfoy a punch. "Oh, as a classmate, you didn't stop the conflict in time, so you also need to bear some responsibility." Professor McGonagall gently patted Ron's shoulder, turned, and left. When she left, she didn't forget to close the door of the compartment for them. Ron stretched his neck and spread his hands, looking like a silly owl. "Ha ha ha." Harry laughed first. Dudley also showed a smile, then it was Ron. "Oh, looks like I can't escape it." Ron shrugged helplessly with a smile. "I heard my dad say that Malfoy's dad is very powerful. I thought this matter would be very troublesome. His father would definitely go to the school to make a scene. But listening to Professor McGonagall, our punishment shouldn't be too heavy. It's just maintaining a facade of fairness. I think she is still favoring Harry. Otherwise, if it were me, I would definitely have done a medical examination on Harry first, instead of just letting us go like this," Dudley said. "Why?" Harry asked with some confusion. Dudley smiled and tapped Harry's forehead, saying, "My foolish younger brother, this is your immunity card." Harry and Ron looked at each other, still somewhat confused. "Because, you are the famous Harry Potter." Harry seemed to understand something and couldn't help but roll his eyes, saying, "Are you going to make fun of me too?" "I wouldn't." Dudley nonchalantly wiped the blood off his hands and picked up the little kitten to continue petting it, a completely different person from when he was violently beating Malfoy and the other two. Now, he seemed so elegant and decent. If he put on a top hat and held a cane, he would be a gentleman straight out of the Middle Ages. "I think the kids in our neighborhood calling you Brother D really wasn't for nothing," Harry suddenly said. "Since language cannot persuade, then we can only use physical persuasion." Dudley raised his eyes and smiled elegantly. Chapter 39, Spells. That was amazing. Could you teach me? Ron asked, looking expectant. Dudley had been so cool just now, his actions were decisive and sharp, giving Crabbe and Goyle no chance to fight back, leaving the two big guys beaten to the ground before they could even use their size to any advantage. Compared to their massive bulk, in terms of combat ability, they weren't even as good as Harry. Do you want to learn physical persuasion too? Dudley laughed. Yeah, otherwise what happens if I get bullied at school? Ron said he couldn't always count on Dudley being there every time. Having offended Malfoy this time, that guy would surely keep looking for trouble for them later on. But, you are a wizard, Dudley reminded him in a friendly way. Oh. Ron looked at his somewhat damaged wand, his face reddening slightly. Right, I almost forgot. Fights between wizards rarely involve such hand-to-hand combat. It only happens with kids like them who have just enrolled. At other times, magic is usually much faster than fists. The school probably doesn't allow us to use magic to fight, right? Harry said. True, under normal circumstances, students are forbidden from using wands to fight. But school rules, well, there are always times when they don't work. My brothers told me that sometimes they cast spells at each other. Ron said. Harry chatted while fiddling with his broken glasses. Malfoy's punch had knocked his glasses flying, and they fell to the ground, causing the lenses to crack directly and the frames to become somewhat distorted. My glasses are broken. I wonder if Hogwarts has a place where they can be repaired. Harry said. Probably not, but I know a spell that can fix things, and when the time comes, find. Before Ron could finish, Dudley took out his wand and pointed it at the glasses in Harry's hand. Reparo. Swish. The glasses in Harry's hand were instantly restored to their best condition, even newer than before. My God, you actually know the repairing charm? Ron was amazed. This spell isn't difficult. I tried it a few times before, and it worked every time. Dudley said, putting away his wand. This spell can be learned by first-year students. For students with good comprehension, self-study might not be difficult. It mainly depends on what is being repaired, which determines the difficulty of the repair. A cracked pair of glasses doesn't require any advanced magical expertise to fix. You actually self-studied magic. Harry put on his repaired glasses and said in shock. He knew Dudley was studying magic, but he didn't expect Dudley to have mastered magic in such a short time. Compared to Dudley, other than having gained some understanding of the wizarding world, he knew absolutely nothing about magic. It's not very hard. Once we get to school, I can teach you. Dudley said casually. This level of magic was indeed not difficult for him. He only needed to master the power of spirit to complete it easily. The sky outside the window had darkened, and the train's speed had decreased. The three of them changed into their wizard robes. The train will reach Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train. We will have it sent to the school for you. A voice echoed through the train, though it was unclear where it was coming from. Harry and Ron both looked a bit pale. It was clear that they were both somewhat nervous. Dudley's expression, however, hadn't changed much, at most showing a bit of curiosity. Having seen many big scenes, he was just somewhat looking forward to this Wizarding World school. The train finally came to a complete stop, and the three of them walked out of the carriage into the corridor outside. By this time, the corridor was already crowded with students waiting to get off. Many people, upon hearing the noise, turned back to look at the rear of the carriage. Dudley noticed that a few people even gave them a thumbs up. Among them, Ron's twin brothers even gave a double thumbs up, almost shouting about how awesome they were. Harry and the others were the last to get off. By this time, it was already a pitch-black night outside. A chill hit them in the face, causing Harry and Ron to shiver involuntarily. First years over here. A familiar voice echoed in the darkness of the night. His massive figure stood not far away, holding a lantern. Standing there, he was like a lighthouse, pointing the way for the first-year students. Harry, Dudley, over here. Did you have a good summer? Hagrid noticed Harry and Dudley and waved enthusiastically. The first-year students began to walk towards Hagrid, while students of other years left in another direction. Many people, after hearing the name Harry, looked towards the first years, discussing something at the same time. "You wait for me." A vicious voice came from the crowd. Harry and the others followed the sound and looked over, discovering that Malfoy and his two companions were standing not far away, their expressions looking terrible. The injuries on Malfoy's face had healed, but there were still faint marks. It was hard to tell what was wrong with Crabbe and Goyle, but judging by their awkward standing posture, they were clearly still in pain. "What, you want to go again?" Dudley smiled and waved his fist. "Ah!" Malfoy screamed and retreated several steps. Only then did he realize that Dudley was more than 10 meters away from him. Such a distance posed no threat to him at all. "You just wait, I've already told my father, you just wait to be expelled." Malfoy clenched his fists, wishing he could rush up and beat Dudley up right now, but he didn't dare. This guy's combat ability was just too strong. The three of them were no match for Dudley. At a time like this, he certainly didn't dare to show off again. "Heh." Dudley sneered, turned his head, and stopped paying attention to the guy. He was just a typical spoiled rich kid. If he wanted to deal with him, he had plenty of ways. "Follow me, everyone, follow me." Hagrid didn't have time to ask Harry what had happened at this moment and led the group of first years onto a narrow, steep path. Surrounded by a pitch-black forest, everyone was very nervous, and no one spoke anymore. "Round that bend, and you'll see Hogwarts," Hagrid said in the darkness. Soon, everyone rounded the bend, and a huge lake appeared before them, and on the hillside not far from the lake, a towering castle stood high. The castle was filled with tower spires, and the lights shining from the windows were like twinkling starlight. The entire castle was reflected on the black water, presenting an indescribable sense of magnificence, while at the same time appearing extremely mysterious. Chapter 40, The Black Lake. Hogwarts. Dolly murmured softly, standing atop the cliff. The ancient castle, full of mystery, made Dolly suddenly feel a sense of anticipation for this school. "Everyone follow me, get on the boats, no more than 4 people per boat." Hagrid shouted to the crowd. By the lakeshore not far away, numerous small wooden boats were docked, each with a dim candlelight emitting a faint glow. Dolly and the other two chose a small boat and sat down. Hermione hesitated for a moment, saw that the other boats were almost full, and then walked towards them. "If you don't mind, come on up," Dolly said to Hermione. "Thank you." Hermione smiled and sat down. Ron's first impression of Hermione wasn't good, but then Hermione was the first to stand up and testify for them, which made Ron's opinion of Hermione much better. "Thank you for speaking up for us earlier," Dolly said to Hermione. "You're welcome, I was just telling the truth. Besides, I also come from a Muggle family, and what Malfoy said about mudblood." Hermione didn't finish her sentence. "Anyway, he wasn't just insulting one person, but an entire group. You were right to teach him a lesson." "Too bad I didn't get to punch Malfoy, Dolly was too fast," Ron said with some regret. "Me too. By the time I reacted, they were already lying on the ground." "What a shame," Harry smiled. Hermione smiled shyly and said nothing more. Soon, after everyone boarded the boats, they rowed towards the castle under Hagrid's lead. According to Hagrid, this was a ritual. First-year students always entered the school this way. The dark water slowly flowed past the sides of the small boats, raising dull splashes. Braver students dared to look at the water, while the timid ones had already huddled together, not daring to look at the dark surface at all. "My brother told me there are water monsters in this black lake," Ron whispered. His voice trembled slightly, whether from fear or cold. "They won't suddenly rush out and eat us, will they?" Hermione asked, a little scared. "Probably not, otherwise Hogwarts would definitely send a professor to protect us." Dolly was originally resting with his eyes closed, but when he heard Ron say there were water monsters underwater, he suddenly became interested. He turned slightly, blinked his eyes, activated his spiritual vision, and looked down into the water. With the faint light emanating from the ancient castle, Dolly could barely make out the water's surface. The lake water in this lake seemed different from ordinary lake water, much darker in color, so much so that under these conditions, almost nothing could be seen. Dolly even speculated that even during the day, the lake water's color would be very dark, Dudley concentrated, and the power of spirituality slowly gathered in his eyes, gradually adding a touch of color to the originally pitch-black lake water. Swished on a faint light streaked rapidly under the water, like a fish, yet also like a person. That is, Dolly's gaze narrowed slightly. There was indeed something strange in this lake water. From what he saw, Beyonder creatures indeed lived here, and some even resembled humans. Merperson? Dolly guessed. There are many legends about merpeople in the world. In the strange world he transmigrated to, merpeople existed, and the advancement of some Beyonder sequences required the help of merpeople. He just wasn't sure what kind of creatures merpeople were in this wizarding world. Besides the humanoid shadows, Dolly also vaguely saw some strange creatures, none of which were from the ordinary world. Suddenly, Dolly noticed that a shadow at the bottom of the lake stopped. It seemed to have noticed Dolly on the surface and looked in his direction. Vaguely, Dolly seemed to hear a beautiful song, gently echoing in his ears. "Duck!" Hagrid's loud shout startled Dolly, and he quickly pulled back his leaning body and lowered his head. They had arrived at the cliff face, and the small boats carried them through a barrier of ivy, then into a dark tunnel. They had arrived in the castle's underground. That really was a merperson just now. Dolly thought to himself. That beautiful song must have come from the merperson. However, compared to the merpeople in that strange world, the merpeople in this world seemed much gentler. They didn't make Dolly feel any danger. Otherwise, Dolly would have immediately realized something was wrong when he heard the song. The area around this castle is even more exciting than I expected. Not long after, their boats reached the end. Once the boats were securely docked, all the first years disembarked together and followed a cobblestone path to a large door. During this time, the round-faced boy named Neville found his toad on the boat. Hagrid knocked 3 times on the door. Boom! The next moment, the door burst open, and Professor McGonagall walked out wearing a dark green robe, her hair tied up in a high bun, completely different from how she looked on the train. I wondered why I didn't see her when we got off the train. Turns out she went back to the castle to change, Ron whispered to Harry and Dolly. Professor McGonagall seemed to hear Ron talking and glared fiercely at him, scaring Ron into not daring to speak out of turn again. Good work, Hagrid. First-year students, follow me. Professor McGonagall didn't say much more and led everyone into the castle. Welcome to Hogwarts. Before you enter the Great Hall, the first thing you need to confirm is which house each of you will go to. Hogwarts has 4 houses, and each house has its own criteria for selecting its students. Professor McGonagall spoke as she walked, briefly introducing the general situation of Hogwarts, which wasn't too different from what Ron had said earlier, just more detailed. Dolly summarized it simply. Gryffindor values courage, Hufflepuff accepts all comers, Ravenclaw likes the intelligent, and Slytherin likes the ambitious. As for how to choose, McGonagall didn't say, only that there would be some tests. This made the first years who weren't aware of the situation nervous, fearing they wouldn't pass the test. Hermione had already started reciting the spells she had learned, and Harry's face was a little pale, showing he was genuinely nervous. It should be a simple test, Dolly said. I hope I can pass smoothly, Harry nodded, although Dolly didn't say anything specific. After he spoke, Harry really seemed to feel less nervous. All right, let's go in. Professor McGonagall finished speaking and pushed open the Great Hall's door. A magnificent hall was revealed before all the first years. Chapter 41 Characteristics of Being Alive. Dudley looked at the splendid Great Hall before him, scanning everything with interest. 4 long tables stretched from the entrance to the platform at the front of the Great Hall, dividing all the students into 4 areas, which were clearly the 4 great houses of Hogwarts. Thousands of candles floated above the tables, illuminating the entire Great Hall. The ceiling above was identical to the sky outside, and one could even see stars twinkling faintly on the platform at the very front of the Great Hall. Behind a long horizontal table, sat teacher after teacher. The elderly, white-haired man in the very center, wearing half-moon spectacles, was none other than Professor Dumbledore, the principal of Hogwarts they had met earlier. Now, form a single file and follow me. Professor McGonagall's voice interrupted the students' awestruck gazes, and she led the way forward. The first-year new students followed closely behind. Harry walked in front of Dudley, and it was clear that his legs felt like lead, making his steps somewhat unsteady. This place is enchanted. The ceiling looks exactly like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, A history. Hermione whispered from behind Dudley. Indeed, it's hard to imagine this as a ceiling and not open air. Dudley echoed. Everyone arrived in the middle of the great hall. On the platform at the very front, Professor McGonagall placed a stool in front of everyone, and then put a rather grubby-looking hat on the stool. Are they going to make us turn that hat into a rabbit, or something else? Harry asked nervously. Probably not. Few people here could do that, Dudley said. This kind of transfiguration spell was not something first-year new students could accomplish, especially since they hadn't received systematic magic training. But that hat, Dudley looked at the grubby hat, feeling that it was not simple. He blinked slightly, activating his spirit vision. The power of spirituality entered his eyes, causing the hat and his vision to undergo some changes. A faint halo spread out, and the hat's shape gradually became distorted in Dudley's eyes. He could vaguely see what seemed to be a figure deep within the hat, the light intertwined, and Dudley wanted to examine it closely, but found that he couldn't see through the hat. Spirit vision was not omnipotent. There were some things Dudley couldn't discern. Oh, it's that time of year again, new students arriving. Suddenly, the hat's folds twisted slightly, creating a slit like a mouth, and it began to speak. Living characteristic. Dudley's gaze sharpened slightly. This hat actually possessed a living characteristic. One must know that in that strange world, only extremely powerful sealed artifacts possessed living characteristics, for example, Trensor Sprawn's book, but this sealed artifact's current activity was very low. Once it awakened, it would bring about terrifying disaster. However, the hat before him seemed to pose no danger. Under the astonished gazes of Dudley and the others, the grubby hat began to sing. The general content was about some of Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry's history, and the origins of the four great houses, and so on. It was quite interesting. After the hat finished singing, warm applause erupted in the great hall. The hat, like a gentleman, bowed slightly to the tables of the four houses, and then became still. I get it now. We just need to wear this hat. Fred and then tricked me into thinking we had to fight a troll as a group, which made me nervous for a long time. Ron turned back and said to Harry and Dudley, "Just wearing a hat?" "That's much simpler," Harry said with a sigh of relief. "This hat is quite interesting," Dudley commented, possessing a living characteristic yet being harmless. This was the first time he had seen something similar. "When I call your name, please come up, put on the sorting hat, and sit on the chair to be sorted," Professor McGonagall said from the stage. "Hannah Abbott." Professor McGonagall called the first name. A rosy-cheeked little girl with 2 golden braids came forward, stumbled to the front of the stage, picked up the sorting hat, and sat on the chair. Hufflepuff. After a few seconds of pause, the sorting hat immediately shouted loudly. Warm applause immediately erupted from the table on the right. Needless to say, this was Hufflepuff. What does it base its sorting on? Dudley frowned slightly at this point. This hat, could it be able to read minds? If so, Dudley would have to be very careful. The contents of his mind absolutely could not be known by others. This would not only bring danger to him, but to others as well. Some things, even knowing them, would bring distortion. Professor McGonagall continued to call out names one by one, and the line of new students grew shorter and shorter. For most new students, the sorting hat had no hesitation, making a judgment within a few seconds. For some, like Malfoy, the hat had barely touched his head when the sorting hat unhesitatingly shouted out Slytherin. "Dudley Dursley." Professor McGonagall's voice came. "Good luck," Harry said to Dudley. Dudley nodded and walked forward. Everyone's gaze converged on Dudley, especially Malfoy's, whose vicious stares seemed to want to devour him alive. However, Dudley paid no attention. He glanced at the chairman's platform. Professor Dumbledore and the others were all looking at him, and Dudley even saw that Dumbledore winked at him. Dudley came to the stool, picked up the sorting hat, and slowly placed it on his head. But he didn't immediately lower his hand. He was prepared to take the hat off immediately if he sensed anything amiss. "Oh, let's see, which house should I put you in?" The sorting hat's voice appeared in Dudley's ear. "Truly excellent talent, and very ambitious, no lack of courage, and wisdom far beyond ordinary people." The sorting hat continued to murmur. "Can it detect my characteristics?" Dudley thought to himself. "Yes, I can detect your strengths and weaknesses, the Sorting Hat immediately said. Dudley's expression tightened slightly. This hat really is reading minds. No, 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 this isn't mind reading. It can only perceive your superficial thoughts. If I could directly read someone's thoughts, I wouldn't just be sorting here, would I? The Sorting Hat said. All right, Dudley relaxed slightly. Wait, look what I've found, this astonishing magic talent. Why didn't I notice it just now? The Sorting Hat exclaimed. Chapter 42 I'm just a hat. Dudley calmed himself, entering a deeper mode of thought to prevent the Sorting Hat from continuing to read his mind, which wasn't difficult for him. Have you discovered my secret? Dudley thought to himself, I dare say, you are absolutely the most magically gifted child I have ever seen in all these years. With just a little guidance, you could become a great wizard. However, this is difficult. Which house should I put you in? Clearly, your courage and wisdom are greatly admired by Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. And your ambition is beloved by Slytherin. As for Hufflepuff, trust me, they would jump for joy if you went there. This is truly difficult. The Sorting Hat fell into a state of indecision. I can't believe this hat is such a chatterbox, Dudley said helplessly. He could feel that his sorting time had far exceeded that of others. In the Great Hall, a murmur of whispers had already begun, everyone wondering why the Sorting Hat had not yet completed Dudley's sorting. Could it be that Hogwarts' Book of Admittance had a problem and sent in a muggle with no magic talent? Malfoy's voice came through, not loud, but in the quiet Great Hall, many could still hear it. That would be too interesting. The famous Harry Potter's cousin couldn't be a squib, could he? Oh, wait, I'm wrong, he's not a squib, because his parents are muggles, hee. Malfoy's sarcastic voice came through, causing quite a stir. What? He's Harry Potter's cousin? Wait, Harry Potter couldn't have come too, could he? Which one is Harry Potter? Let me see. The whispers in the Great Hall grew louder, even becoming somewhat boisterous. Silence. Professor McGonagall said with a frown. Instantly, the Great Hall became quiet again, but from everyone's expressions, it was clear they were all a bit impatient. Professor McGonagall glanced at Dudley, who was wearing the sorting hat. To be honest, Dudley had taken far too long. All right, let me take one last look at your qualities, to decide which house to put you in. After much rambling, the Sorting Hat finally made its decision. Hurry up, Dudley couldn't help but urge. Suddenly, the Sorting Hat let out a startled cry, falling directly from Dudley's head and going silent. What's going on? Everyone looked on in shock at the scene unfolding before them. Even Professor McGonagall, standing nearby, was stunned. Dudley also frowned. He hadn't done anything. What was wrong with this hat? Seeing this, Professor Dumbledore immediately stood up, walked over, and picked up the hat from the floor. He looked at the Sorting Hat, and after a moment of silence, he said, there was a small mishap. Professor Dumbledore said, Professor McGonagall, let the new students eat first. The sorting ceremony will continue after dinner. Professor Dumbledore said, but, Professor McGonagall's expression was hesitant. The sorting hadn't been completed, so where should these new students sit to eat? Everyone can sit wherever they like. Pick a table you prefer. After Dumbledore finished speaking, ignoring McGonagall's expression, he gave Dudley a deep look, then took the sorting hat and left the Great Hall. Professor, Dudley stood up. He truly hadn't done anything. It's all right. Perhaps there's a problem with the sorting hat. You go back and eat with everyone else for now. Professor McGonagall said. She also didn't understand what had happened. All right. Dudley returned to the line, and facing Ron and Harry's confused gazes, he could only shake his head. Since Ron's brothers were all in Gryffindor, Harry, Dudley, Hermione, and others sat together at the Gryffindor table to enjoy dinner. In Dumbledore's office. What happened, my dear friend? Dumbledore asked, looking at the sorting hat. The sorting hat seemed to shake its head and slowly began to speak. I don't know what happened. I just wanted to see which house Dudley was most suited for. I wanted to, understand him deeply, and then I knew nothing. Dumbledore pondered for a moment and asked, Did you discover anything? Oh, speaking of discoveries, I truly found that this child's magic talent is very high, higher than yours, Dumbledore, and higher than that child before. You know who I'm talking about. And then? Dumbledore asked. There was no then. I wanted to see the essence deep within him, and then I knew nothing, the Sorting Hat continued, but honestly, I felt fear, and I don't know why. You know, I was left behind by Gryffindor, so if I'm afraid, it means Gryffindor would also have similar emotions when facing such a situation. In short, I can't quite explain what's going on with him. After all, I'm just a hat, Dumbledore. The Sorting Hat had no hands, otherwise, at this moment, it would surely have shrugged, looking innocent. All right, you're just a hat. Dumbledore nodded. So, which house do you want to put him in? Dumbledore asked. If it's just my own judgment, I would choose Slytherin. This boy, in Slytherin, will definitely achieve great things. Of course, with his talent, he wouldn't fare badly in other houses either. Dumbledore fell silent, no longer speaking. In the Great Hall, after about 10 minutes, Dumbledore returned to his seat with the Sorting Hat. Many teachers asked Dumbledore what had happened, curious about the earlier events. The students also looked over, and many eyes fell on Dudley. This meal, it truly has no taste at all. Dudley was a bit helpless. Because of the previous incident, he had even garnered more attention than the famous boy Harry Potter, drawing countless eyes, which was not what he wanted. After dinner, the Sorting Hat was placed back on the chair. Dumbledore stood up, and instantly, the clamor below disappeared. Everyone watched him intently. There was a small accident earlier. The Sorting Hat might have been too excited, just like you young ones. Next, the sorting ceremony will continue. As for Dudley Dursley, his house is Gryffindor. As Dumbledore's voice fell, the Gryffindor table immediately erupted in thunderous applause. Chapter 43, Grudges of the Previous Generation. Gryffindor, huh? Dudley murmured softly to himself, smiling and greeting the students around him. He was already sitting with Gryffindor, so he didn't even need to change seats. That's great, we're most likely in the same house, Ron said happily. Everyone in my family is in Gryffindor, so I'm definitely no exception. I wonder which house I'll be sorted into, Harry said nervously. Hopefully Gryffindor. Of course, the other houses aren't bad, but it's best not to go to Slytherin. Those bad wizards basically all come from Slytherin, and you know who is one of them, Ron said. Slytherin. Dudley glanced at the Slytherin table and saw Malfoy looking at him angrily. I feel like the Sorting Hat seemed to want me to go to Slytherin, but in the end, I was sorted into Gryffindor. Was this the Sorting Hat's choice, or did someone make the choice for the Sorting Hat? Dudley withdrew his gaze and looked at the dais, especially at Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore happened to look over at that moment and smiled faintly at Dudley. Next, the sorting ceremony continued. Soon it was Ron's turn, and as expected, he was sorted into Gryffindor. Then it was Hermione, and she was also sorted into Gryffindor. Finally, it was Harry. When Harry Potter's name appeared, the entire Great Hall fell silent, and all eyes converged on him. Many people, even if they knew Harry Potter had come to Hogwarts, still felt it wasn't real until they saw him with their own eyes. Until this moment, Professor McGonagall finally called out his name. I wonder which house he'll be sorted into. Dudley chuckled. Harry's sorting also seemed to be much slower than others, but there were no surprises. After about half a minute, the Sorting Hat loudly announced its decision. Gryffindor. Warm applause swept through the entire Great Hall. Not only students from Gryffindor, but also many students from other houses applauded Harry, except for Slytherin. Harry sat next to Dudley and let out a long sigh of relief. Congratulations, we're now classmates in the same house, Dudley said, patting Harry's shoulder. Well, as long as you don't bully me, being your classmate isn't a bad thing, Harry laughed. Dudley pursed his lips, unsure what to say for a moment. What are you guys talking about? Ron asked with his mouth full of pumpkin pasties, his voice muffled. Nothing, Harry said, shaking his head with a smile. The sorting was finally done, and his unease greatly diminished. Harry began to truly take in the entire Great Hall and the people around him. At this moment, he seemed to truly belong here. Suddenly, Harry let out a soft cry and reached up to cover the scar on his forehead. What's wrong? Dudley immediately asked. My scar just had a burning pain, right when I saw that professor, Harry said, frowning and pointing to a professor on the dais. That was a middle-aged man with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and sallow skin. Dudley frowned. He had noticed this professor before because his gaze had swept over them more than once. Although this action was unintentional, it still put Dudley on alert. And now, Harry's scar on his forehead hurt just from looking at him. which was not a good sign that he knew very well that a very evil aura was hidden in Harry's scar, something even he found troublesome. "Who is that professor, and what does he teach?" Dudley asked Percy, who was not far away. This was Ron's brother, and they had already chatted and were familiar with each other. "He is Professor Snape, Dean of Slytherin House, and the potion class professor. However, he doesn't seem to want to teach this subject and wants to teach defense against the dark arts instead. Unfortunately, that subject already has a professor." Percy said, "Did you see the empty seat next to Professor Snape? That was supposed to be for Professor Quirrell, who teaches defense against the dark arts, but I heard he had a bit of an accident while traveling in Albania recently and got injured, so he missed this sorting ceremony. I don't know when he'll be back." "I see." Dudley nodded, blinking slightly. Spiritual power surged into his eyes, and he subtly tilted his head to look at the dais. Under spiritual vision, Snape didn't seem to have anything special about him. As for whether he had an evil aura, Dudley's current strength was insufficient to perceive it from such a distance. He could only wait until he had close contact to sense it carefully. Oh, poor Professor Quirrell. He's always been a nervous person and stutters when he talks. Now that he's injured in Albania, I wonder if he'll recover? If he doesn't, Professor Snape might actually take over the defense against the dark arts course. Percy continued, "I hope poor Professor Quirrell is all right." Dudley echoed. Harry leaned over and whispered, "I feel like Professor Snape really dislikes me. Did I offend him somehow?" Dudley pondered for a moment, then suddenly chuckled. "There's no love without reason, and no hate without reason. When this happens, it likely represents grudges from the previous generation." "Huh? Grudges from the previous generation?" Dudley shrugged and continued, "That's how it's usually written in novels. Also, looking at Snape's age, he should be about the same age as Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. That means they were likely classmates back then. Maybe Professor Snape even pursued your mother. Of course, this also means he was your father's love rival. It's understandable for him to be hostile towards you. After all, the only part of you that resembles Aunt Petunia is your eyes. Other than that, you should be very much like your uncle. In that case, Snape definitely wouldn't give you a good look when he sees his former love rival." He had been listening carefully to Dudley's analysis, but by the end, it was just too outlandish. "Oh, and there's another possibility. Given the traditions of our great British Empire, do you think it's possible your father and Snape were actually a couple, and then Aunt Petunia broke them up? So he holds a grudge." Dudley said thoughtfully, "Stop. That's enough, you're getting more and more ridiculous." Harry was speechless. "Ha ha, just a bold guess." Dudley laughed. "I'd rather believe pigs can fly than believe your outlandish guesses," Harry said. Chapter 44, Honorable Name. "Just a guess." Dudley said he himself found it outrageous, but in that bizarre world, he had encountered things even more outrageous than this, so such a guess was understandable. After all, in a world where a man can turn into a woman, and a stunning beauty at that, anything is possible. Amidst the laughter and chatter, the sorting ceremony finally concluded, and the puddings on the tables disappeared. Professor Dumbledore stood up, and the entire great hall immediately fell silent. "Now that everyone is well fed and watered, I have a few more words to say to you all. As the new term begins, I wish to draw your attention to a few points. First-year students, please note that the forest on the school grounds is forbidden to all students. Some of our older students also need to remember this." Dumbledore's gaze swept over the Weasley twins. "Furthermore, Mr. Filch, the caretaker, has asked me to remind you all not to use magic in the corridors between classes. Finally, I must tell you all that those who do not wish to suffer an accidental, painful death should not enter the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor." After Dumbledore's words fell, whispers arose in the great hall. Everyone knew not to go into the forbidden forest because there were many fierce beasts there, but what was the situation with the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor? They had never heard that it was forbidden before. "I think he should at least tell us prefects the specific situation," Percy said. "Perhaps there's some secret," Dudley said. "Generally, places that are forbidden tend to pique some people's curiosity. Hogwarts has many school rules, and they are very strict. However, They usually don't require special reminders. The fact that Professor Dumbledore specifically mentioned it means that it could threaten our lives, so we had best obey, Percy explained. Although he didn't know why the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor was now forbidden, Percy firmly committed this prohibition to memory. Rules are meant to be broken, wouldn't you agree, Harry? Dudley smiled and looked at Harry. What are you going to do? Harry asked sharply. Nothing, just talking casually. Besides, Harry, I don't think you seem to be someone who likes to follow rules, Dudley said. Is that so? That's because you don't know me well enough, my foolish brother, Harry said. Dudley smiled and said nothing more. Dumbledore had already organized everyone to start singing the school song. Although the lyrics were all the same, everyone was using different melodies, causing the entire Great Hall to be somewhat chaotic. Dudley's thoughts began to drift. Speaking of which, the Black Emperor and Judge Pathways emphasized rules and order, twisted rules, the utilization of order, and even the creation of rules and laws. Thinking of this, a revered name suddenly appeared in Dudley's mind. You are the Supreme Emperor. The embodiment of order, the manifestation of chaos, the source of all rules. You are order, and also disorder. Buzz. Dudley's mind felt as if it had been struck by a heavy blow. The surrounding Great Hall instantly receded at that moment, and he seemed to have arrived in another world, a space filled with darkness and twisted light. Everything around him seemed insubstantial. There was no concept of distance here, nor any concretization of time. Everything was void, yet extraordinarily real. Where is this? Dudley's face showed shock. That revered name had suddenly appeared in his mind, and before he could react, he had directly recited it. These words seemed to be etched deep in his memory, triggered at that very moment, and then he was brought to this strange place. I am not substantial, I am a spirit body. Dudley looked at his body. The surrounding light and shadows continued to change, flickering erratically. Wait, this is... Dudley's gaze narrowed, fixing on his chest. There was a brass book there, emitting a faint glow, and mercury-like script flowed from it, seeping into the surrounding dark space. The surrounding world gradually brightened, transitioning from illusion to substance, as if a stable order and law were being constructed in a void. Dudley took a breath and looked around. In his mind, a similar space gradually appeared. Suddenly, the surrounding light and shadows began to change faster, as if they had a direction, quickly outlining a massive palace. After an unknown period of time, everything around finally solidified. It's very similar to the Tarot Club's space, but in some places, my memory couldn't fill in the gaps, and the rules here completed those missing parts. Dudley said, looking at the scene. The long bronze table, the gray mist, the Tarot Club from his memories, were all replicated at this moment. However, the familiar figures were gone, and so was the deity who called himself the Fool. Just as Dudley was about to look around, his brain suddenly felt dizzied. He knew this was a sign of excessive spirit power consumption, and he couldn't stay here any longer. His gaze followed his inner guidance. Looking downwards, the original ground disappeared, and Dudley saw an ancient castle standing on a cliff. His gaze pierced through layers of obstruction, looking down at the massive great hall below. He saw Harry, and he also saw himself. Buzz, his spirit body returned to his physical body. Everything happened in an instant and ended in an instant. Whoosh! Dudley took a deep breath. His head throbbed with pain. The excessive consumption of spirit power made him feel extremely uncomfortable at the moment. He reached out and touched his chest. Trunso's brass book was there. He always carried this sealed artifact close to him to prevent it from suddenly activating and causing uncontrollable disaster. The Hogwarts school song finally stopped at this moment. All right, now it's bedtime. Prefects, please take the new students to their dormitories. Dumbledore waved his hand, officially ending the banquet. Everyone stood up, preparing to leave. Dudley tried to stand up, but his body was somewhat uncontrollable. What's wrong with you? Harry, quick-witted, immediately helped Dudley up. Nothing, just a bit tired. Dudley said simply, you look very unwell. You were fine just now. How? Harry looked at Dudley's pale face, feeling a bit flustered. It's nothing. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep, Dudley said. He just wanted to lie down and sleep now. Ron, come help out. Harry called Ron over, and the two of them helped Dudley, following the new students out of the Great Hall. Chapter 45 The Disappearing Mouse. Harry and Ron helped Dudley follow behind the Gryffindor students, with Percy, the prefect, leading the way and explaining some important rules of Hogwarts to the new students. During this time, they also encountered ghosts. These strange spiritual entities piqued Dudley's interest, but unfortunately, he was too exhausted to study them. Not long after, they finally arrived at Gryffindor Tower. At the end of the corridor hung a portrait of a very plump lady dressed in pink. Password: Dragon Slag, Percy said. The fat lady nodded, and the portrait swung open, revealing a circular opening just wide enough for one person to pass through. New students, please note, interhouse visits are forbidden. So you must remember the password, otherwise, you might not be able to return to your common room, Percy warned. The new students followed Percy into the Gryffindor common room, a comfortable circular room filled with plush armchairs. Harry and Ron helped Dudley sit on one of the chairs, and everyone curiously surveyed the common room, which belonged exclusively to Gryffindor students. The girls' dormitories are over there. You can go by yourselves. Boys are not allowed into the girls' dormitories. The staircase over there is enchanted. Percy's first sentence was addressed to the girls, and the second to the boys. Is the boys' dormitory enchanted? A boy named Seamus asked. No, Percy shook his head. That means girls can enter the boys' dormitories, so I suggest you don't get too wild, you know. Oh! That's not fair. Why can girls enter the boys' dormitories, but boys can't enter the girls' dormitories? This is discrimination. Several small boys immediately exclaimed, it's certainly not fair. I think you can go and suggest it to Professor McGonagall, Percy said with a shrug. All the boys immediately fell silent. Professor McGonagall was not someone to be trifled with. They wouldn't dare suggest anything to her. All right, follow me. Percy said no more and led everyone towards the boys' dormitories. Dudley finally regained some strength and could follow everyone on his own. After a spiral staircase, they finally reached the top of Gryffindor Tower, which was the boys' dormitory. The four-poster beds had deep red velvet drapes, looking very soft and cozy. Their luggage had already been brought up and placed by their respective beds. Everyone was exhausted by this time, especially Dudley. The consumption of spiritual power required time to replenish, so he didn't even open his luggage and just collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. The night passed uneventfully, and Dudley had a very good sleep. In the morning, Dudley woke up to Ron's startled shout, "What's wrong?" Dudley sat up, looking around cautiously. Oh no, Scabbers is gone. Ron had searched the entire dormitory, but there was no sign of Scabbers, that rat. Dudley frowned. On the train, he had noticed that the rat seemed unusual and intended to examine it thoroughly, but unfortunately, the rat struggled violently, and Dudley ultimately failed to check its condition. Could it have run out? Harry said, still half asleep. I don't know, Ron said, glancing at Big Orange, who was lying beside Dudley. It definitely wasn't Big Orange. Big Orange is just a kitten, not old enough to catch rats yet, Dudley said. Moreover, he was certain that Big Orange did not have Scabbers scent on her. I'll keep looking, it might just have run out, Ron said. Is there anything special about your rat? Dudley asked. Nothing special, it just eats and sleeps and eats. It just lives quite a long time. I don't even remember how long it's been with our family. Ron said, lives quite a long time? Is it possible that it's not an ordinary rat, but some kind of extraordinary, magic creature? Dudley said, magic creature? Impossible, it's just an ordinary rat, not a magic creature. Ron immediately denied it. Is that so? Dudley frowned. From what he had observed with his spirit vision on the train, that rat clearly had spiritual power, meaning it wasn't an ordinary rat, and Ron's family didn't seem to know this. Furthermore, when he observed it with spirit vision, he seemed to see a humanoid shadow on the rat's soul. Unfortunately, it was just a fleeting glimpse at the time, and Dudley didn't have time to look closely. He had planned to observe it thoroughly after entering Hogwarts, but now, on only the second day, Scabbers had disappeared. A keen intuition told Dudley that there was likely something wrong with this rat. The wizarding world seems to have many mysteries, Dudley thought to himself. I hope I'm not overthinking it. Ron searched for a long time, but Scabbers seemed to have evaporated, disappearing from Gryffindor Tower. Because of the search for Scabbers, their first transfiguration class was delayed. Of course, it was also because they were unfamiliar with the routes in Hogwarts, which led to them taking many detours. From now on, we should leave earlier. Those staircases keep changing, and we can't find the way at all. Harry said while running. Perhaps we should get a map of Hogwarts, Ron also said. No need, I've already memorized the route here. Dudley said, Sequence 8 of the Justiciar pathway is Sheriff. As long as one has seen the real person, a photo, or a sketch, they can firmly remember the target's appearance, gain additional senses on a supernatural level, and also possess the mystical ability to remember routes they have walked after chanting that honorific name last night and entering that mysterious space. The Sequence 9 Beyonder characteristic in Dudley's body had been almost completely digested. He estimated that he could be promoted to Sequence 8 in the next few days, which was more than half a month faster than Dudley had anticipated. Therefore, for Dudley at this time, memorizing the routes in Hogwarts Castle was not difficult. You've already memorized it? I can't remember anything at all. If you asked me to walk it again now, I'd get lost, Ron said in surprise. The three hurried along and finally arrived at the Transfiguration classroom. Good, Professor McGonagall isn't here yet, Harry said, letting out a slight sigh of relief as he looked at the first-year students quietly studying. Maybe Professor McGonagall is also late. Ron said with a smile. Dudley looked at the quiet classroom and instinctively felt that something was wrong. How could first-year new students study so quietly without a teacher? It would be good if they didn't flip the classroom over. Chapter 46 Animagus. Suddenly, Dudley's gaze fell upon a tabby cat on the rostrum. He felt that this tabby cat looked somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before, and when Dudley noticed it, its gaze also turned towards him, with a serious expression. Swish! The next moment, the tabby cat leaped up, rapidly growing larger in midair, and by the time it landed, it had transformed into a woman dressed in dark green robes. It was Professor McGonagall. Oh, my goodness, that's amazing. Ron was dumbfounded with shock, blurting it out, Thank you, Mr. Weasley. Professor McGonagall glanced at the three of them, then said, Perhaps I should turn you into a pocket watch, then you would know the meaning of punctuality. Harry said apologetically, Sorry, Professor, we got lost. Then turn into a map. Professor McGonagall said with a solemn expression, Going to your own seats shouldn't require a map, right? Harry and Ron dared not say anything more and quickly walked towards their seats. Only Dudley stood still, watching McGonagall, seemingly lost in thought. Mr. Dursley, do you have a question? Professor McGonagall noticed Dudley. Dudley was startled awake from his contemplation and, after a moment of thought, asked, Professor McGonagall, I want to know, can wizards all transform into the animals they wish to become? Professor McGonagall lifted her head slightly and said with some pride, Of course not, only a few can perform such transfiguration, and such transfiguration has a special name, called animagus, which must be registered with the Ministry of Magic. Furthermore, an animagus can only transform into one fixed type of animal, and it also has a certain relationship with their own body shape and weight. It's not that they can transform into whatever they wish. Upon hearing Professor McGonagall's explanation, many people let out a gasp of surprise. Originally, they thought Professor McGonagall turning into a cat was a very common ability, but now it seemed that this ability should be very rare. Are there many animagus among wizards? Dudley asked. Very few. As far as I know, there are currently only 7 animagus registered with the Ministry of Magic, including me. McGonagall said, Thank you, Professor McGonagall. Dudley nodded and returned to his seat. It's good to be interested in transfiguration, but don't bite off more than you can chew. You need to start with the most basic transfiguration now. As for animagus, that's not something you can consider at the moment. McGonagall said, After all, transfiguration will be the most complex and most dangerous magic among the courses you will learn at Hogwarts. All right, for today's practice, you need to turn the match in front of you into a needle. This is the most basic transfiguration. Next, watch carefully how I do it. Professor McGonagall began to formally teach the lesson. She meticulously explained the spell, pronunciation issues, how to use the wand, how to correctly cast transfiguration, and so on. On the other side, after Dudley sat down in his seat, he fell into deep thought. Animagus. The word echoed in Dudley's mind. If Professor McGonagall hadn't appeared, perhaps Dudley wouldn't have made this connection, but seeing Professor McGonagall transform herself into a tabby cat and then back again, Dudley couldn't help but associate it with other things. For example, Ron's rat Scabbers. Of course, he wasn't very sure about Scabbers' situation. He just remembered that when he used spiritual vision to observe Scabbers, he seemed to see a humanoid soul on its body. If this was the manifestation of an animagus, then undoubtedly, Scabbers should be an animagus. However, if he really was a person, why would he transform himself into a rat and stay in Ron's house all this time? What was his purpose? Also, why did he suddenly choose to escape? Was it because he discovered something? Dudley had many things he couldn't figure out. For others, it would be a case of innocent until proven guilty, and they might simply dismiss such a thing as an illusion. But for Dudley, he would not rule out any possibility, and would even instinctively lean towards the worst-case scenario. If I encounter that rat again, I must find a way to catch him and investigate the situation. Dudley thought to himself. At the same time, he glanced at McGonagall. If he remembered correctly, that tabby cat had once appeared at 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. At that time, Dudley felt that this cat was a bit peculiar, but he didn't think much of it. Now it seemed that it must have been Professor McGonagall. She might have been protecting them, or perhaps monitoring them. She appeared after the Gringotts incident, so it seems highly likely she came to protect Harry. The wizarding world truly has surprises everywhere, Dudley thought to himself. A cat passing by his own yard turned out to be his teacher. A pet rat of a classmate he had just met might be an animagus, and going to the bank to withdraw some money, he encountered his enemy. It was unbelievable. If he hadn't experienced it himself, Dudley wouldn't have believed any of it was real. Or his most instinctive reaction should be that he had been set up, the Rider pathway, or that pen. However, he also knew that unless there were other powerful Beyonders from that bizarre world, it would not be an easy task to arrange him. Could it be that everything I am experiencing right now is being arranged? Suddenly, a thought popped into his head, scaring Dudley into a cold sweat. Impossible, no one can do that, not even a god, right? Dudley frowned, and couldn't help but look up. Would there be a pair of eyes up there, looking down at everything happening here? Mr. Dursley, is there writing on the ceiling? Professor McGonagall's stern voice came. Being late had already made her very displeased, yet Dudley was still not listening properly, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. Everyone turned to look at Dudley. Dudley retracted his gaze and said, "No, this is how I think. I am pondering the knowledge of the transfiguration spell that Professor McGonagall just explained." "Oh? And what results have you pondered?" McGonagall asked with a solemn expression, slowly walking over. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had already closed their eyes. They could already feel that Dudley was about to be dealt with by Professor McGonagall, and losing points was definitely inevitable. On the other side, the Slytherin students were almost bursting into laughter, especially Malfoy, who wished Professor McGonagall would punish Dudley severely. "Well, I've gained something." Dudley nodded. "Such as?" McGonagall walked in front of Dudley, like this. Dudley pulled out his wand, pointed it at the match on the table, and chanted the spell. Swish, under everyone's watchful eyes, the match instantly transformed into a needle. Chapter 47. This makes sense. Oh, my goodness, he succeeded. Amazing, he cast it successfully on his first try. He wouldn't have been practicing in secret, would he? Everyone who saw this scene showed an incredible expression. Professor McGonagall's originally gloomy face brightened considerably after seeing Dudley successfully transform the match into a needle. A good transfiguration spell. Professor McGonagall commented. Although she tried her best to appear calm, she couldn't suppress the upward curve of her lips. Everyone, look, Mr. Dursley has completely cast the transfiguration spell, and it was very successful. You all should learn from him, understand? Gryffindor, 5 points. Professor McGonagall nodded at Dudley, then turned and returned to the podium. "Oh, no, you actually succeeded," Hermione said, a little unwilling to admit defeat. She took out her wand and chanted the spell at the match on the table. The match trembled slightly, its end turned into a needle, but the front was still a match head. "How did you do that?" Hermione turned to look at Dudley. "I just did it like this," Dudley said, shrugging. These simple spells posed no difficulty for Dudley, who could precisely control spiritual power. He had already successfully attempted them during the summer holidays. Hermione bit her lip. She had practiced beforehand, yet she still wasn't the first to succeed, which gave her a deep sense of frustration and also some anger. Of course, this anger wasn't directed at Dudley, but at herself, because she could have done better. "That's impressive," Ron and Harry also said from the side. The two of them weren't very shocked that Dudley directly cast the transfiguration spell. After all, Dudley had already shown his repairing charm on the train, and as for Dudley surpassing them and being the first to complete the transfiguration spell, they felt no burden and were happy for Dudley. After all, they both knew their limits and had never considered themselves capable of being the first to successfully cast this magic. For the rest of the time, Professor McGonagall continued to explain some key points for transfiguration, then let everyone start trying it themselves, and personally came over to guide them. Even so, by the time class ended, only Hermione had completed the transfiguration spell. The others still hadn't made much progress. After class, everyone else had left. Dudley slowed down his pace, and after everyone else had departed, he walked towards Professor McGonagall. "What is it, Dudley? Do you have any other questions?" Professor McGonagall, seeing Dudley, showed a rare smile, and didn't even call Dudley by his surname, but directly by his first name. Clearly very satisfied with Dudley's performance in class earlier, she felt that she needed to reevaluate this child from the Dursley family. "Professor McGonagall, I'd like to ask if there are any unregistered animagus in our country?" Dudley inquired. "Unregistered animagus?" Professor McGonagall frowned and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not very clear on that either. But I imagine, if there are any, they must be extremely few. After all, animagus is a very advanced transfiguration, and it's easy to make mistakes during the process. Once something goes wrong, they might never be able to turn back into a human." "I see," Dudley nodded. Professor McGonagall pushed up her glasses, staring intently at Dudley, and said earnestly, "Dudley, although your talent is good, you must not think you can try to practice such advanced transfiguration. It's very easy for problems to arise. Do you understand what I mean?" "I understand, Professor McGonagall. Thank you for the reminder. I'm just interested in animagus," Dudley said with a smile. Clearly, McGonagall thought Dudley wanted to practice this transfiguration. "Very good. Maintaining interest is essential for learning, but please remember not to touch things beyond your ability," McGonagall said. "Okay, thank you, Professor McGonagall." After thanking her, Dudley left the classroom. He had been thinking earlier about whether to tell others that Ron's rat might be an animagus. After much thought, he dismissed the idea. Firstly, doing so could easily bring trouble upon himself. Secondly, this world didn't have specialized church enforcers like the mysterious world to manage these matters, and as a child, hardly anyone would believe him. Moreover, even if he were to report it, it shouldn't be him doing it. I'll see how things develop later. If necessary, I'll let Harry report it. It's perfectly reasonable for the famous Harry Potter to discover his friend's rat is an animagus, Dudley thought to himself. His experience in the Tarot Club taught Dudley that many things don't need to be done personally, especially potentially dangerous ones. Effectively utilizing official power to achieve goals is truly twice as effective with half the effort. In the corridor, Harry and Ron were waiting for Dudley. Seeing Dudley come out, the three of them walked towards the common room together. Hermione's expression was simply speechless. It was as if completing the transfiguration spell stole her thunder, as if no one could surpass her. Ron complained, "That's just her personality. She might be quite competitive. It's not that she has an issue with me," Dudley said. Ron was about to say something more when Harry, beside him, pulled him back. "All right, we're all friends, and she even spoke up for us before," Harry said. He was referring to the incident on the train. Hearing this, Ron said nothing more. In the following days, everyone attended many interesting classes. For example, herbology class, which allowed Dudley to learn about many plants in the wizarding world, many of which possessed spiritual power, and some of these herbs were even connected to that strange world. This made Dudley begin to ponder whether he could concoct some potions to use in conjunction when digesting new Beyonder characteristic in the future, to reduce the risk of losing control. In addition, the history of magic class was also very interesting. Of course, what Dudley found interesting wasn't the class itself, but the person teaching it. Professor Binns was the only ghost professor. It was said that he fell asleep in front of the fireplace one year, and the next day, when he went to class, he forgot to bring his body, thus becoming a ghost and continuing his educational career. During class, other students were drowsy from Professor Binns's hypnotic voice, while Dudley kept staring at Professor Binns, analyzing what exactly this unique existence of a ghost entailed. This was very interesting to Dudley. However, this carefree situation didn't last long. On Thursday afternoon, Dudley and his two friends received a notice that they needed to go to Professor Dumbledore's office that evening. Malfoy's father had come to demand an explanation. Chapter 48 Expulsion. We won't really be expelled, will we? Harry asked, a little worried that he heard that Malfoy's father was very powerful and a member of the school board. If he insisted on expelling them, no one would be able to stop him. Don't worry too much. I heard my dad say that even though Malfoy's father is powerful, at Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore still calls the shots. He definitely won't expel us, especially you, Harry, Ron said. Even so, Ron's expression wasn't very good. He looked a bit worried. What are you two worried about? Neither of you laid a hand on him. If anyone's getting expelled, it's me. You can just blame it all on me, Dudley said indifferently that he believed that Professor Dumbledore wouldn't allow students to be expelled so easily, and even if he were expelled, it wouldn't be a big problem. The entire wizarding world wasn't limited to Hogwarts for learning magic. If he wanted to learn, no one could stop him. Self-study would be perfectly sufficient. No way. How can we let you bear the responsibility alone? I'll say I also got involved. If they're going to expel someone, they can expel me too, Harry said, as if he had made up his mind. He really liked Hogwarts and enjoyed the atmosphere here. It was a joy he had never experienced before. But if he were to be expelled because of what happened on the train, he would rather be expelled with Dudley. After all, Dudley had acted for him. He couldn't do nothing. All right, things aren't that bad yet. Let's not scare ourselves, Dudley said, comforting the two. During dinner that afternoon, Hermione also learned about the incident. If you need witnesses, I'm willing to testify for you, Hermione said seriously. Okay, thank you in advance, but I don't think we'll need you, Dudley said. If Malfoy's father could truly have his way at Hogwarts, then Hermione's testimony would be useless. Harry and Ron didn't eat much. They both seemed to have lost their appetite. Dudley, however, ate quite a bit. Honestly, the food at Hogwarts was really good. At 7 in the evening, they arrived in the corridor outside Professor Dumbledore's office. Professor McGonagall was already waiting for them there. Professor McGonagall. The three spoke at the same time. Not late, good, Professor McGonagall said. Her expression was serious, but her tone was calm, and she even teased the three of them a little. Follow me. After Professor McGonagall finished speaking, she led them to a doorway, inside which was a huge eagle sculpture with slightly spread wings. Come up. Professor McGonagall stood beneath the eagle sculpture's wings, where there were a few steps. Dudley and the other two quickly walked up. Lemon sherbet. Professor McGonagall said. Buzz. The eagle sculpture began to rotate slowly, and the steps they were standing on also began to rise gradually. Just explain clearly what happened on the train later, understood? After the sculpture stopped moving, Professor McGonagall instructed As the Dean of Gryffindor and a witness to the incident on the train, Professor McGonagall was naturally involved in this matter, understood? Dudley was the first to speak. The door in front of them slowly opened. Professor McGonagall walked in, followed closely by Dudley and the other two. Inside was a small room with numerous photos hanging on the walls, all of them of past Hogwarts principals. Some of them glanced at Dudley and the others who walked in, while others were dozing, completely ignoring Dudley and them. In addition, there were many novel gadgets here, as if it were a small magic market. Dudley's gaze swept across the room. Even without activating his spiritual vision, he could tell that many items here possessed spiritual power. Immediately, his gaze fell upon a shelf not far away, where there was a fiery red bird with magnificent feathers, looking very beautiful. A phoenix? The moment Dudley saw this bird, he immediately guessed it was a phoenix. Such a magic creature was rarely seen even in the wizarding world. He hadn't expected Professor Dumbledore to have one. It has quite a few good things on it. Dudley's gaze was a little fervent. The phoenix seemed to sense Dudley's gaze and glanced at him. Oh, Harry, Ron, and Dudley, you've arrived quite early. And of course, Professor McGonagall. Dumbledore's voice came, and then his figure appeared at the railing on the second floor. Has Lucius not arrived yet? McGonagall asked. Soon, they should be on their way. Professor Dumbledore said as he walked down from upstairs. Would you like some candy? When you're nervous, sweetness is the best sedative. Professor Dumbledore said, pointing to the candy on the table. No, thank you, Professor, Harry said. They were a little nervous, but they didn't want Professor Dumbledore to see their nervousness. Oh, all right. Dumbledore didn't insist. Sounds came from the door, and soon, 3 people walked in. One was naturally Malfoy, another was Professor Snape, the potion class professor and dean of Slytherin House. The last was a middle-aged man with pale blonde hair, cold gray eyes, a pale, pointed face, meticulously dressed, and holding a cane in his hand. "You're here." Professor Dumbledore nodded to the people who had just entered. "Professor Dumbledore, I think my meaning is very clear. Hogwarts does not welcome students who assault classmates before even entering the school, so my opinion is to expel them." Lucius Malfoy walked in and immediately gave Dudley and the other 2 a cold look. After his gaze lingered on Harry's face for a moment, he arrogantly said to Professor Dumbledore, "Potter, you guys just wait to be expelled." Malfoy stood behind his father, sneering and mouthing words to Harry and the other 2. "Lucius, everything has a reason. It's wrong that Harry and the others hit Malfoy, but you must understand what your son did before that," Professor McGonagall said, somewhat indignantly. "Professor McGonagall, no matter what my son did, they laid hands on my son, and that makes them in the wrong. Such people must be expelled." Lucius continued arrogantly, "Let me see, Mr. Harry Potter, the famous one, probably thinks that with his reputation, even if he hit someone, he wouldn't be expelled," Snape said slowly, looking at Harry with cold eyes. "I didn't," Harry said anxiously. "Malfoy insulted my parents first, and he called Dudley a mudblood, and he was the one who struck first." "Is that so? But according to my son, you insulted him first, and you were the ones who struck first." Lucius narrowed his eyes, staring coldly at Harry. Chapter 49, Interrogation. "That's right, he was the one who said us pure-blood wizards are trash first, so I retorted," Draco Malfoy said immediately. He had already discussed this with his father before coming here. He only needed to cast dirt on Harry and the others, and his father would handle the rest. As for what actually happened that day, it didn't matter. "That's not true. It was Draco Malfoy who insulted Harry's parents first, and he also insulted the Weasley family, which led to the conflict," Ron retorted anxiously. "Humph, the Weasley brat is friends with Harry, his words cannot be trusted," Lucius Malfoy said coldly. "You!" Ron was very angry, his face flushed, but he didn't know how to retort. "We have other witnesses. There were many students in the compartment at the time who can testify for me." Harry was still calm and spoke up immediately. "Is that so? I took a look. Those children are basically all from Gryffindor. You are in the same house, so you must have colluded already." "Their words cannot prove anything either," Lucius Malfoy said unhurriedly. "Lucius, since that's the case, then Draco Malfoy's words cannot be proven either, can they?" Professor McGonagall said with a frown. "I believe that Crabbe and Goyle, as children from pure-blood families, their words are sufficient to prove the truth of the matter," Lucius Malfoy said indifferently. What a double standard, Dudley thought. The Malfoy family wasn't here to reason with them at all. "Father, although Ron and Harry insulted me, they didn't lay a hand on me. This brat from a Muggle family is the real culprit. I can let the others go, but he must be expelled." Draco Malfoy looked at Dudley viciously. After all, Harry was the boy who lived. His fame meant it was very difficult to expel him. Professor Dumbledore would almost certainly not agree, and there would be obstacles from the board of directors. As for Ron, he barely participated in the matter, so it was difficult to pin a charge on him. Moreover, Ron's father worked at the Ministry of Magic. Even if his position wasn't high, he still had some connections, making it very difficult to expel Ron. The only one left was Dudley. This brat from a Muggle family was not only the culprit who beat him up but also had no background to speak of. The Malfoy family only needed to exert a little influence. Expelling such a student was simple for them. "Professor Dumbledore, you see how tolerant my son is. Harry and Ron didn't really do much. I can choose not to demand their expulsion and just impose other punishments, but this boy must be expelled. We will not allow a child with such violent tendencies to enter Hogwarts." The board of directors, Lucius Malfoy wiped his cane and said slowly, in his view, the matter was basically settled. Even if Professor Dumbledore didn't agree, he could pass a resolution through the board of directors to expel Dudley. After all, Hogwarts was not entirely under Professor Dumbledore's control. "No, Professor Dumbledore, Dudley only acted because of me, Harry said hurriedly, his face pale. If you want to expel someone, expel me too. And me, Ron added, although he knew the consequences of doing so were very serious. At this moment, he couldn't care about that. He couldn't just let Dudley be expelled alone. Heh, what deep brotherly love, Lucius Malfoy mocked. Unfortunately, it was completely useless. Dudley, do you have anything you want to say? Professor Dumbledore's gaze looked at Dudley through his half-moon spectacles. This was the first time he had asked. Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall was a bit anxious and wanted to say something, but Professor Dumbledore raised his hand to stop her. Dudley looked at Professor Dumbledore, pondered for a moment, and said, I want to confront Draco Malfoy one-on-one. Oh? Very well. Professor Dumbledore nodded and made a gesture of invitation. Draco Malfoy glanced at his father, and after seeing Lucius Malfoy nod, he looked at Dudley. What, are you still trying to make a desperate struggle? It's useless, Draco Malfoy said coldly. Dudley smiled and walked toward the middle of the room. Professor Dumbledore's office was generally dim, with only a brighter beam of light in the center, perhaps because many of the former headmasters hanging on the walls were already resting. Let's stand over here, the lighting is better, Dudley said. Draco Malfoy didn't think much of it and followed, taking the initiative to stand in the middle of the room. This was where the light was best, so it was only right for him to stand there. Dudley didn't compete. He voluntarily gave up the position and stood in the relatively dim light. In this way, everyone's gaze was focused on Draco Malfoy. And this position was the farthest from Professor Dumbledore and the others. Very good. Dudley looked at Draco Malfoy standing in the light, a faint, imperceptible smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. The scene before them looked so much like an interrogation room, with bright lights shining on the person being interrogated, while the interrogator stood in the shadows, controlling everything. Mr. Malfoy, I will ask you a few questions. You only need to answer yes or no, Dudley said simply. The Beyonder ability had been activated. For a Beyonder of the lawyer and arbiter pathways, dealing with the current situation was not difficult at all. In fact, Sequence 7 of the Justiciar pathway was the interrogator. Dudley felt the Beyonder characteristic within his body being rapidly digested. Perhaps this was an opportunity. Draco Malfoy looked around, instinctively feeling uncomfortable. The light seemed a bit too bright, even dazzling, while the others were hidden in the darkness, making it difficult for him to see their expressions. This made him feel somewhat nervous and uneasy. Fine, Draco Malfoy clenched his fists and said, feigning calmness. Lucius Malfoy frowned. He felt his son was being too compliant with Dudley. At the very least, he should have retorted. However, with everyone's eyes converging on his son, it wasn't appropriate for him to step out and say anything, so he could only watch. For now that he wasn't worried about anything, as long as Draco Malfoy didn't speak nonsense and answered according to what they had discussed, then expelling Dudley was a certainty. First question, did you say that Harry's father and mother were ignorant of what was good for them, and did you hope that Harry would follow his parents and die? Dudley's voice was unhurried, echoing in Professor Dumbledore's office. However, falling into Draco Malfoy's ears, it was filled with an indescribable majesty. Chapter 50, Taking Charge. Yes. Malfoy blurted it out with almost no hesitation. Lucius, who was standing beside him, was stunned. He had not expected his son to answer so readily. Snape, standing next to him, frowned slightly, especially when Dudley mentioned Harry's mother, his expression clearly fluctuating, and it was this small fluctuation that Dudley's gaze caught. It seems my guess was correct. Snape might have liked Harry's mother, who is my aunt. Dudley had a guess in his heart. Did you insult me by calling me a mudblood? Dudley asked again. Malfoy looked at Dudley, his mind seemingly not having caught up, but his mouth honestly said, yes. Hearing Malfoy answer so readily, Lucius finally couldn't sit still and immediately shouted, Draco, what are you saying? Malfoy was startled by his father's roar, but he didn't seem to realize the problem. The questions he answered were indeed things he had said. Lucius, listen to them. Dumbledore glanced at Lucius and said indifferently. Lucius wanted to say something more, but after seeing Dumbledore's gaze, he could only swallow his words. Seeing this, Dudley continued to press. Malfoy, did you say that Harry would follow the same path as his parents? Equally reckless? Malfoy didn't answer immediately this time. He tried hard to think for a moment. A moment later, He nodded, yes. Dudley smiled slightly and looked at the people around him. Harry's parents were killed because they resisted Lord Voldemort, which means you think Harry following the same path as his parents is a bad thing? Moreover, do you think resisting Lord Voldemort is wrong? Or rather, your family has been on Lord Voldemort's side from the beginning. No one expected Dudley to ask such a question, and for a moment, the entire office fell silent. Malfoy was also dumbfounded by the question. Yes. He said blankly, Draco. Lucius's face turned extremely ugly, and he roared, ah. No, I mean, Malfoy fell into complete panic. He couldn't even express himself accurately. Sweat had already seeped from his forehead. Facing Dudley's questions, he felt an unprecedented pressure, especially when Dudley asked questions. There was a powerful sense of authority that made him involuntarily answer along with Dudley's words, without even realizing what he had said. Mr. Malfoy, I'm done asking. If your family is on Lord Voldemort's side, then all of this makes sense. Dudley looked at Lucius Malfoy and said coldly, after all, it was Harry who stopped Lord Voldemort. He destroyed the Dark Lord you believed in. It's only natural for you to seek revenge on Harry. And along with that, you even resented me and wanted to get rid of me. My poor aunt's family died at the hands of the Dark Lord, and now they are being persecuted by your family. This wizarding world is truly disappointing. Dudley said, You. Lucius was stunned by Dudley's questioning. He never expected this brat to connect these matters to the Dark Lord, which was completely beyond his expectation. So that's it. I was wondering why Malfoy was targeting Harry before, but now that Dudley has said it, I understand. Professor McGonagall gave Lucius and Draco a deep look. No, it's not like that. Listen to me, our family has absolutely nothing to do with the Dark Lord. Lucius was a little panicked. His family had indeed followed Lord Voldemort before. Fortunately, he had some connections with the Minister for Magic, and seeing the situation turn bad, he immediately switched sides, which saved his life and cleared everything. Now, being questioned by this kid Dudley, he had directly escalated what was originally a children's fight to him being a follower of the Dark Lord, and even openly persecuting Harry Potter to avenge the Dark Lord. This accusation was too big. Moreover, their family's background itself was not clean and couldn't withstand scrutiny. I just couldn't stand Harry and wanted to deal with him. It has nothing to do with the Dark Lord. Draco said quickly, I see, you wanted to persecute Harry to avenge the Dark Lord, is that right? Dudley looked at Malfoy and continued to ask, No. Malfoy was almost brought to tears by Dudley's questioning. In all these years, no one had ever questioned him like this, and the logic was so rigorous and clear that he couldn't refute it, nor did he know how to refute it. Professor Dumbledore, you see, they are persecuting me and Harry simply to avenge the Dark Lord. Dumbledore glanced at Dudley, then looked at Lucius, his gaze profound and inscrutable. Dumbledore, it's not like that, don't listen to this child talk nonsense. Lucius said anxiously, a flush spreading across his pale cheeks. Immediately, his gaze turned to Snape, hoping that Snape could say a few words at this moment. However, Snape acted as if he hadn't seen Lucius, saying nothing. As early as Malfoy admitted to saying that Harry's mother should die, he had no intention of helping Malfoy anymore. Lucius, are you really targeting Harry and Dudley for the Dark Lord? Dumbledore asked with a solemn expression. No, of course not, we just, Lucius almost blurted out that they just wanted to deal with Harry, but he couldn't say that. We can discuss this matter from the beginning again, I think. Lucius tried to change the subject. He couldn't let Dudley continue speaking like this, otherwise, if this got out, he wouldn't be able to explain it. By the way, Professor Dumbledore, do you still remember the incident at Gringotts? Dudley suddenly asked. Dumbledore nodded and looked at Dudley. Everyone else showed thoughtful expressions, guessing what incident Dudley was referring to. Soon, they all thought of the same thing, Harry and Dudley being attacked at Gringotts and almost killed. Harry and I almost died at Gringotts. Is it possible that this wasn't a coincidence, but rather someone intentionally wanted to kill Harry there? After Dudley finished speaking, he raised his gaze slightly and looked at Lucius and Draco. If I'm not mistaken, I seem to have seen Mr. Malfoy at Gringotts that day. You were there, right? Dudley asked with a deep gaze. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in part 3. Peace.